everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
And Delilah, what game are we talking about today?
Oh, no game, sir. No game.
No game?
Yeah, no.
What?
We're talking about a
Plot
show.
twist.
We're talking about what? Since when do we fucking do this? We're
I
talking about
know.
a show?
We're not TV critics at all.
Well, wait, what show are we talking about?
Well, it is based on a video game, so I guess that's good. That gives us some credibility. Yeah.
Okay. Is this a game that we've played?
Yes. And a game that we've done an episode on, I believe.
Aha, and what game might that be?
The Last of Us.
We are going to talk about the first season of HBO's The Last of Us.
Yes.
Produced by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. I believe they're both producers, right?
Yes. I know Neil Druckmann for sure, who develops The Last of Us.
Yeah, sorry, they're the creators, and they were the writers, not the producers. I misused the word. I apologize.
Co-creator of The Last of Us.
Yeah, co-creator. Well, I'm saying he's the creator of the show.
I know.
Yeah, but co-creator of The Last of Us. Yeah, I'm not gonna erase Bruce Straley's name from the records, as Neil has slightly maybe done. But yeah, we're talking about HBO's first season of The Last of Us. Reap the Spoils. I guess I can't say that we're a video game spoiler cast anymore following this episode, but we are a monthly Spoilercast podcast where we usually take a game. In this case, we took a TV show and we watched the whole thing, and we're going to sit here and we're going to spoil the whole thing for you. We're going to talk about the entire show, all 9 episodes of it. So if you have not watched this show, and frankly, if you haven't played the game either that this show is heavily based on, highly recommend doing both of those things.
Yeah, I would actually ask, let's set the ground rules right now. I think at least the first game is okay to spoil.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and say we will not spoil The Last of Us Part 2. There's only one thing I want to bring up from The Last of Us Part 2. It's pretty negligible. It should not ruin anyone's experience or impact of playing that game. So we're primarily just going to be spoiling this this first season of The Last of Us television show from HBO, and we can't really talk about this show without also talking about the video game it's based on.
I won't spoil anything from Last of Us Part 2, but I will mention it in terms of aspects of the adaptation. I won't actually spoil anything that happens in The Last of Us Part 2.
Okay. Well, we'll see where that goes, and if I have to censor you,
if you have to censor me, so be it.
Yeah. Wouldn't be the first time, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, and also, like, the Last of Us, the video game, as far as the video game's concerned, it's come out on the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4 with a remaster, and now the PlayStation 5 with a complete and full remake that you can purchase called The Last of Us Part 1. It should be very easy to get and play if you have a video game system. And we've done an episode on it too. We did an episode on The Last of Us video game, so go listen to that if you're familiar with the video game, or if you just want more of us talking about The Last of Us following this episode.
Yeah, I would honestly recommend listening to our discussions of Part 1 and Part 2 first to get a frame of reference for things I'll say in this. Yeah.
Again, with Part 2, I want to just steer clear of, because that's not what's being adapted today.
More part, I guess. Part 1. Yeah.
If you've played Part 2, go listen to our episode on Part 2. And I'll just go ahead and give a fair warning. Like, we will talk about major plot elements that happen across both, but I feel like a lot of this conversation is going to come down to the differences between the show and the game. So just to, give you fair warning about that. We might not talk as much about the big plot points as we might about the differences surrounding those big plot points.
Yes, and if you want to know our perspective on the plot points, you should listen to the Spoilercast once again. Also, I'm coming from a place of The Last of Us is like my second favorite game of all time, and so I came into this show with a very critical eye.
Wait, what's your first favorite game now, Delilah?
Elden Ring.
Oh,
yeah.
I should have fucking seen that one coming. All right.
And I guess if we're adding these kinds of prefaces, like, I named my dog Ellie, so This, no matter how
Aw.
vicious I get, understand that I very much love The Last of Us Part
Well,
1.
you know what, guys? I'm gonna name my first kid Joel, so take that. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Katie would kill me if I did that. Okay, I think we're done with all these warnings and stuff out of the way. So this is a spoiler cast of The Last of Us season 1 from HBO. Are we ready for a brief history lesson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know I need to. I didn't know it was
Jason,
up
I
to me.
I always need your approval. I always need it.
No, you
Every
don't.
time we do an episode, I need to hear from you. Okay. One thing I neglected to put in these notes that's probably a little important is that The Last of Us, the first original game, came out on, I think, June 13th, 2013 for the PlayStation 3. Let me just fact check myself on that. I'm sorry, June 14th. I was one day off, 2013. Um, so this game is now is now a decade old. That makes me feel very old. Um, the show actually started as a film adaptation. In 2014, it was announced that there was going to be a film adaptation of The Last of Us. And that entered development hell about 2 years later. As a lot of film adaptations based on Sony proper or PlayStation properties kind of ended up for a long time, and we're kind of now coming out of that development hell into something of a, I feel like renaissance isn't the right word, but we're getting a lot of PlayStation Productions things. Um, so there will be more to come.
Yeah,
Uh,
Sony already has their foot in the movie business, and they're trying to leverage their games to expand that.
yeah. Craig Mazin, who was the creator, writer, and producer of HBO's Chernobyl miniseries, which was very critically acclaimed. I have not seen it, but it is on my list to watch eventually, even before this show came out with his name attached to it. I've been meaning to watch Chernobyl. He was approached about doing the film adaptation in 2018, and I guess turned it down. He was kind of surprised and was skeptical of this being a film adaptation because he felt it would lend itself better to a television adaptation. Eventually, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann were introduced. I didn't know this. Shannon Woodward introduced them in 2019, and she's a mutual friend of both of theirs. Shannon Woodward being the voice and motion capture artist for Dina in The Last of Us Part 2. So, just all sorts of Last of Us connections. Um, Craig Mazin pitched the show to HBO with Neil Druckmann, just as a show instead of a film adaptation. It got approved and it was announced in March 2020. What happened in March 2020, guys?
I don't know, nothing
No,
serious.
no, not nothing. It was no big deal. So yeah, pretty much this entire television show was produced and filmed and made under the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Um, the show finally began airing on January 15th, 2023. Its last episode aired on March 12th, and it was renewed for a second season on January 27th, less than 2 weeks and two episodes in to the show starting. So, and it goes without saying, like the ratings kept rising and rising and rising with every episode, and it's one of HBO's most successful shows to date.
Yeah, it was cool walking into work and having coworkers that have know nothing about games just be like, "Oh yeah, I'm watching this new show called The Last of Us," and I'm just like, "Yes, you are."
Yeah, that's gonna be a thing that I definitely I wanna vocalize. I know I've said this to you guys before, but we'll talk about it shortly. But yeah, that's the end of the history lesson. I is there anything else you guys want to bring up before we start spoiling the show
No.
and the game by extension?
I guess I'll open up with a statement: subtlety, subtext, and pacing.
Okay, here
Three
we go.
things the game has that this show does not. In fact, it is embarrassingly bad for HBO.
Okay,
And
so
we will get
we're
into all of this. Will be a theme that permeates all of my criticisms as we go through these notes.
Okay.
Before you tune out, okay? Let's just remember that Jason has his beliefs and it doesn't represent everyone's, and that's what makes this podcast fun, is that we all have different opinions and we can appreciate everyone's different opinions.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make his opinion any less valid than anyone else's.
And I guess also forewarning is I have a feeling this episode's gonna get kind of contentious, so be ready for
I'm
that.
so excited.
I
I love
mean, I might sound angry. It's similar we talked about with in our last episode, which you should go watch, about Jedi Survivor, which is Star Wars. With Last of Us, I've kind of reached the end of the stages of grief after part 2. With I'm in the apathy phase, and I'm actually kind of just sad that this show is the way a lot of people are being introduced to this story. But we'll get more into it.
I have to ask this, Jason. I've been worried about you watching this show now when Final Fantasy 16 is out, and I'm wondering if that is coloring your opinion in any way, shape, or form, if you could be honest.
I will say that I had to really for the back half of the season, because I was watching it this past weekend, I had to kind of space out the episodes between play sessions of 16. However, I will say I watched the first 3 episodes, binged them like a month ago, and then after those 3 episodes, which wasn't all bad, mind you, we'll talk about it as we go through them, I just had no interest in continue watching. I was almost subconsciously trying to avoid finishing it for like a month before I had to for this episode. And it just happened to align that watching the rest of it coincided with Final Fantasy 16's release.
Yes, thank you.
Man, all right. we're gonna start spoiling this. So if you haven't watched the show, if you haven't played the game, highly suggest you pause the episode, go play the game, watch the show, maybe even listen to our Last of Us original game spoiler cast that came out a couple years ago, and coming back to this episode and listening to us spoil this show in its entirety. Are we ready to talk about the show?
Yes, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the first thing I do want to talk about, and I kind of want to, we can kind of jump around. We can go loosey-goosey here, but I kind of wanted to, I felt like this being an episodic show, it being a television show, like we could go episode by episode. So, and really the first thing I want to talk about is that opening scene of the first episode. I thought that was a super chilling and fascinating way to kick things off. Having that talk show with these scientists on this talk show in like 1968, talking about what they think could lead to the end of the world. And the one mycologist on there talking about how he thinks fungus will be the end, and how the camera work is just like jumping around from the audience to them talking, and it's getting closer on their faces, and it's just very chilling. And you have Big Head from Silicon Valley being the actual talk show host, who just kind of doesn't say anything and says, "We'll be right back," and then it cuts to black and the show starts.
Yeah.
I fucking loved that. What did you guys think?
Absolutely. I mean, it starts from them being like very flippant, like, oh yeah, like let's not take this serious. What the hell is this guy talking about? And then to it actually setting in, and it was very reminiscent of COVID for me, because I remember when COVID started, my supervisor, like I would talk about it, like, oh, we should like start preparing for this shit. And she was just like, the internet overblows things. It's fine, and everyone doesn't want to believe that shit is serious, and that's exactly what this show demonstrated, which is what made it more chilling. The context of the shit that we went through.
I had people telling me COVID, it'll be over in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
That did not happen.
Yeah.
Jason, what did you think of that way to open the show?
So to be fair, to the director, who I think what's his name, whatever,
Craig Mazin.
Mazin. Sorry. I do think that the scene is well directed. And I think what you're saying is true about the actor. I do like the actor who plays the scientist, who's kind of postulating how a fungal infection, and he plays it off very well. I love him from The Mummy. He was in The Mummy. But he in a serious role here, he does do a very good job, and the facial expressions, the way it's edited, yeah, I agree that like it's effective in what it's doing. I just fundamentally disagree with what it's trying to do, which is try to explain away not even a common like a minor critique some people had of the game, which is that a fungal infection is impossible, which doesn't matter in the context of the game.
I don't think that's what that scene was trying to accomplish,
It's
though.
not. It's not. It's trying to, and this is again going back to pacing. It's adding something that is not necessary to the story it's trying to adapt.
Well,
And
okay.
there's a ton of. Let me just finish real quick.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't mean
Yeah,
to interrupt you. Go ahead.
there's a ton of scenes throughout the first half of the season that do this kind of stuff. Try to explain and build up, the reasoning why cordyceps in the original game was just an excuse to have a cooler, different aesthetic to a zombie apocalypse, because that's what it is at the end of the day. You don't need to know anything more for the story to work, and the mystery of it is honestly cooler, and the way it functioned, like in the game, is cooler. The spores work much better than fucking, and we'll get to it later in other episodes, or I guess later on in this episode. But I didn't need to know anything more about cordyceps. It just, despite how well directed the scene is, and I agree with what you're saying, at the end of the day, it's just filler, and I was kind of just bored by it.
No, I
It's
don't
just,
agree with that at all, Jason.
it goes back. You might have noticed that I gave a big grin when you talked about how Mason thought it would be a better series than a movie. The exact opposite is true. This should have been at most a mini series, which
Oh
HBO
my
has done
gosh.
in the past.
Man, I feel like I just disagreed with everything you just said, Jason.
That's fine. No, that's fine.
This is gonna be a contentious episode.
I'll give my reasons why as we go. But
Well,
filler like this is one of the reasons why I actively didn't want to watch, because the story that I thought I was going to watch was Joel and Ellie.
Well, okay, hold on, because I completely reject the idea that this scene was filler. It wasn't filler. The thing we got to keep in mind here is that a video game is one thing, and a video game, you, the player, are put into the role of the character you're playing as, right?
Mhm.
When you play The Last of Us, the player is Joel. You are Joel, holding the controller, controlling everything he does.
Mhm.
So obviously, you wouldn't have scenes like that talk show, or like the mycologist in Indonesia. You wouldn't have scenes like that in the video game, because that would take you out of the role of Joel. This is a
Mhm.
television show. It's made for a completely different audience. This is the thing that I was kind of alluding to earlier, which is that this show was not made explicitly or directly for the three of us, because we're gamers. We played
Yeah,
the
no.
game. The show doesn't need to exist. But for our parents who don't play video games, for our coworkers who don't play video games, this is just like a new prestige drama on HBO that they can pick up. They can pick up, press play, and watch. Let's talk real quick about the gameplay for HBO's The Last of Us. You pick up your remote, you navigate to the HBO, or I'm sorry, the Max app, as it's now called, and you go find The Last of Us, and you press play. Like, that's it. That's all there is. So you're not controlling anybody. So you have to and this, I feel like this is going to come down to like some of the complaints I saw a lot of people having about there not being a lot of infected, there not being a lot of like combat or struggle. And it's like, well, that stuff's not that interesting in a show like this. Like, if this were to be an action show, yeah, you'd want action, but that's the game isn't even an action game. And in the show, based on that game, you're not controlling the character. So it's not really filler so much as it is setup. It's leaning more into the horror aspect of The Last of Us and giving us a really chilling opening to kind of set up the world. Um, I don't
Can I
I
ask
don't
you a simple question? Because
Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
What does this add to the core story that wasn't already in the game?
Well, okay. I understand what you're saying about you don't need answers to the questions, and I agree with that in a
Because
lot of
it also there's a fundamental rule that permeates the entire
hold.
universe. More
Okay.
complex systems are more fragile, and this applies to storytelling as well. So the more information you're adding makes your story and potential plot hole, it makes it a more fragile story. And this is
But I don't
unnecessary
see how that
information.
opening does that. How does that opening make it a
For-
more fragile
It
story?
happens over time, and I'm more preluding to other things that
Well,
are other
I think
additions they made.
the other thing that you're alluding to, I think, is irrespective of what this opening does. All this opening does is it's not.
All right,
I don't know.
we're spending too much time on the opening. So
I know we're just talking
I
about the
think
opening scene.
I agree, I fundamentally agree with you guys that like the way it's directed and whatnot is fine. but it doesn't add anything and wasn't necessary. I don't know.
I mean,
That's all I can say.
I would say sure, maybe it wasn't necessary, but I would prefer to have it than not have it.
That's
I
fair enough.
I think with this being a television show, you have to expect certain things like that. You have and I feel like if the show didn't have that and with it just opened with Sarah waking up in the morning and then making breakfast and whatnot, I don't know. I don't I wouldn't think that that's a better way to start the show than this opening that kind of sets us up for what might happen. Because, like Delilah said, I think it also works really well contextualized in real life how a lot of people thought that COVID wouldn't be a big deal.
And that global warming isn't real.
Right. And I also think it speaks to it, and I think it also speaks to what you're saying, Jason, and how there were a lot of there were a lot of skeptics or people criticizing the story of the original game, saying like, oh, cordyceps can't infect humans. That kind of doesn't make any sense. Well, they kind of directly address that in that scene. It's talking to those critics, those people that are like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Everyone in that room thought that that scientist didn't make any sense, and it was all set up for the story we were about to go on, the backstory we were about to get. You
That,
know?
but I feel like when we learn about cordyceps in the game, it's through literal documents, and that's just not something that you
Yeah,
can
and
adapt to a TV show.
right. That's not like the whole Ish story is kind of completely gone, and because we're not gonna sit there and watch Joel read a bunch of notes and letters that are left
Yeah, sure,
behind. It
sure.
just doesn't make any sense to get that back. Like they have to incorporate other ways to give the backstory, and these scenes are kind of it. That's kind of how
Yeah,
they
but
have to do it.
and I think this is just where we're just going to hit crossroads in the original story. The backstory you're referring to just wasn't necessary or really. I mean, not irrelevant, but like it's a zombie apocalypse. That's all you need to know. Like that's what it was. It just had a unique aesthetic. You didn't need to know what cordyceps was and
Yeah,
all this
but
stuff.
I agree and understand where you're coming from. I just
Yeah.
don't. I again, this is a
All,
television
all, all
show.
I'm saying is I did find it interesting. I didn't find it add
Yeah,
anything.
no, that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't persuade you otherwise, and I'm not gonna try. I just think I think it's better than you're giving it credit for in terms of
Oh
setting up
no.
the world as for a television show versus setting up the world for a video game. I
And
think
I
go ahead, Delilah.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say I will agree with Jason in terms of other elements of the show as we get like into other episodes that there is some subtlety that I feel like could have been translated to the TV show that didn't need as much context as was given. And we'll get into it later, but I just didn't think that this beginning scene was one of those examples.
Yeah.
Okay, we're
Okay.
spending way too much time on
I
the
was gonna
fucking
say
prologue. Yeah, yeah.
like this is just the first like 5 minutes of the first episode. God damn. Okay, episode one. So fun fact: this show was supposed to be 10 episodes and was reduced to 9. I read because what they had for the first episode, they didn't feel would be sufficient enough to get people to come back for the second. So they kind of combined the first 2 episodes into one longer one. So that's the first episode that we get, which is pretty obvious. It's split into 2 parts, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So let's talk about the first half with kind of the expansion of seeing Sarah. In the game, we only see her the night of the outbreak, and in this show, we actually get an entire day in the life of Sarah, Joel's daughter. Um, how did you guys feel about that kind of expansion?
Well, I thought it was great, not just because Sarah is an awesome character in the game as much as she is in the show. I thought actually this actress did a really good job of getting the vibe of Sarah being like a cool kid who's like sarcastic and things like that. But I just really like how they demonstrated Outbreak Day. Just the context of like how it affected the neighbors and more than just like from Joel's perspective, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was also not that the game by any means did it bad, but giving us more time with Sarah, getting to know her a little better, gives us more reason to care when she is killed toward the end of the first half of the episode. Not that again, not that the game didn't do that well. It did it very well, but with this being a television show, you're not put in the shoes of Joel. directly, giving us more time with the character and seeing more of the dynamic she has with her father. I think it was well warranted and it was very well done.
Um, so my primary problem with expanding, and I mentioned pacing earlier. I see what it's trying to do. They're trying to build tension. The problem is it goes on way too long. They needed to cut down this whole like day with Sarah by like half. Understand that we wait longer in this episode to see Outbreak Day actually happen than you wait to see the shark and Jaws. Okay, so like just on a purely minute by minute basis. So like the entire time I'm like, all right, the first 10 minutes I'm like, okay, they're building, and then gets into like 10 plus minutes. I'm like, okay, okay, and then it gets into like 30 plus minutes. I'm like, I don't care about any. I care about Joel losing his daughter as not the inciting incident of the plot, but like as his back. I care about the character. Like I know Sarah's gonna die. Like I get that you're trying to in the background subtly point out things that are changing as a result of the outbreak, but it's like it's not an outbreak doesn't happen until like this episode. I think was like an hour and 20 or an hour and 30. Doesn't happen until like the 1 hour mark. And one of the things that
Just
made it
before it.
Yeah, and one of the things that made the game so effective is that because you're playing from the perspective of a child at the time, it's very sudden and it adds to the chaos and confusion that a child would experience who has no idea what's going on around her. And that's what drives so much not I mean aside from the fact that it's a child that gets killed is the fact that you're in her shoes feeling that chaos. Here it's like a slow build and then like it drives up. There's even more time padded out from them driving away. It doesn't feel nearly as chaotic. It just feels like I'm rolling towards the inevitable. I know it's coming, and I really don't care about anything else that's going on. Again, pacing. Like this episode, I think is the longest one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
again, it comes down to the fact that they took the proposed first two episodes, combined them
yeah,
into one to have a longer opening and to kind of end it on a note that would make the audience want to come back the next episode, which we'll
it,
talk about
yeah.
the latter half of the episode shortly.
It really just came down to me. I was bored because they were trying to do in an hour and a half what was done in 10 minutes in the game.
Longer than 10 minutes, but
Yeah, you get what I'm saying, though. Yeah,
again, yeah, I think a lot of this is going to come down to different tastes, and I think personally, I've maybe I'll say this a little more directly or what have you, but um I think it's important to view this as again as a show and not as as an adaptation of a video game that needs to follow in the exact same footsteps. Because a lot of the stuff that's done in the game will not translate well to a television show.
Oh, no, no, I get that. I'm not saying that there shouldn't have been changes at all. I'm just saying that the changes, uh, up to this point, the changes I think are just objectively worse. Not objectively,
I mean,
abjectly. I meant to
yeah,
say
yeah,
abjectly worse. Yeah.
subjectively, like definitely not
No,
objectively.
no, no, no. I meant to say abjectly, and I
I know,
accidentally said
yeah.
objectively.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
okay, it's okay. I disagree, but I don't think we need to keep arguing for every
yeah.
single
No,
thing
no.
we disagree on.
I just want to say, like, one thing about this episode that I adored is it added a horror element to. It's a horror game, it's a horror show, but it added just even more horror with that scene with the old lady when
Yeah.
she was like opening her mouth and like she was behind Sarah. Like that actually freaked me out, and that's not something we
Mhm.
ever saw in the game, which I thought was actually a good addition to add the context of how fucking freaky this shit is. And
I totally agree. And like Jason, you pointed this out, like you get what they were trying to do. They were trying to build tension.
Yeah,
And
it
I
just they
understand
spent way too much time on it. That's all I'm
I
saying is that
I
they
under
need to
yeah,
edit this down a lot.
I disagree. I think it was very well done and they spent plenty of time on it, but again, it's just gonna come down to differences
But again,
in our
like as I
taste.
said in the beginning, this story is more suited to a movie or a miniseries, not a 9,
Dis-
10
dis-
episode long TV
Disagree on
series.
that. Here's the thing about, and I agree with Craig Mazin why he said this wouldn't fit a film adaptation. Um, they would have to cut so much to fit this even into a 3-hour film.
yeah.
There would just have to be so many
No,
concessions made in order to
that's why I
make that
said
work.
that's why I said miniseries. But yeah,
Well, I mean, you could
yeah.
argue if the let me ask you, what is a miniseries?
So there's I think the longest is the John Adams one on HBO, which I think was 5 or 6 episodes.
Okay, so
You could do like 2, 3, maybe 4 episodes. 4 episodes I think actually work nicely because of the structure of the game story in terms of how
see,
it jumps around.
I still think doing that would do a massive disservice to the amount of stuff that they did adapt from the game. You would have to cut so much if it was just cut down to 4 or 5 episodes. And like we'll talk about some of the pacing issues, like they definitely could have, especially in the back half. I do agree with you that there could have been there could have been some better decisions made to make the pacing feel a little less jarring in the back half of the show.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I still do not think that a miniseries would be enough to cover this game in a way that fans would be happy with.
Yeah.
Um,
And like to your point about we're not in Joel's perspective. I thought that seeing the neighborhood and how Outbreak Day affected just the entire town was so cool, and not we only
Oh yeah.
saw how it affected like things in the aftermath, but not the lead up to it. And I like the tension building. I'm a sucker for tension building, so I thought that
No.
context was really cool.
I want to be very clear. As I said, I understood what they were trying to do, and I didn't have a problem with it in theory. It was just the execution. I just felt like they spent way too long on it.
Nice, like it was implied that it was like a nice, cool, like cozy town, but
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to see it in
Well,
action
it's
was
in
like,
Austin, I believe they put it in the show. I don't remember
yeah.
where it was in the original game. If they even
Oh
said.
yeah, it was definitely in Texas. I would assume
No,
Austin, but
it was in Texas. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on this one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not expecting to convince you
Oh,
guys of any of my
I know,
critiques.
and I
Yeah.
think we're not expecting to convince
Yeah,
you
yeah,
either.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I hope no one is like really concerned about how tumultuous or argumentative we might
Oh,
get.
go watch our Last of Us Part 2 if you played the game. Yeah.
Don't worry,
uh,
we all love each other here. This is a very common thing between Jason and
oh, you
Delilah and
should see
I.
the Slack chats.
Oh yeah.
You guys don't even see all of it.
Oh man. Okay, so and again, I just want to say like what they're able to accomplish in the game when you're playing as Sarah for a shorter amount of time, that's enough to get you invested in the character. They need to give more time in the show to show you more of her character because you're not playing as her. You can't get as invested in as short of amount of in an amount of time. But other things that were in that first half of the episode, there's a lot, and this was something that I started to see theorized after this episode, which was fascinating to actually get confirmed a couple episodes later. They keep bringing up flour-based ingredients, making cookies, making pancakes, and like Sarah and Joel and Tommy all manage to avoid eating any of those things, whereas other people do eat those things. And we'll circle back on that in a couple episodes. I just think it was a really interesting time for these episodes to be airing and for me to be seeing those discussions and for that actually to come to fruition as a written decision. It was really interesting. Um, so Sarah gets shot. We see that. Jason, actually, what did you think of the plane crashes instead of the tanker like taking crashing into the car?
I mean, same effect. I'm like,
Yeah, okay.
it's just different. It's different, same thing.
Yeah.
Also widens
And
the scale, I feel.
Yeah.
once you hit Outbreak, like a lot of it, not all of it, but most of it plays out like it does in the game.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so and the rest of the episode, once you hit Outbreak, it was just fine for me.
Yeah. What going, you know, maybe this might be another thing that you thought too much time was spent on and it was too slow and boring, but it was interesting to see, you know, Sarah's life in Austin prior to the outbreak, and then as a parallel it was interesting to see Joel in mundane life in the QZ, the Boston QZ, um burning bodies of like infected people or dead people or what have you, and kind of mulling around trying to get food rations. The whole plot with Robert kind of comes into play, and we get introduced to Tess. Uh, did you feel like that was too slow too, or?
Um, yes, A and B. I guess are we going into episode 2 now?
No, I'm
Well,
still on episode 1, but go ahead, Delilah. What did you want to say?
Yeah, I want to wait. I want to wait because there's other stuff besides pacing with that stuff.
so there's a few things. One thing is to address the argument that there's not enough infected. This is the one episode where I would say, yeah, there's maybe not as much infected interactions as the game, but I feel like the infected interactions we have in this show are actually better because that scene where Joel's getting chased by that infected and he's just like getting thrown around the shop, like the way he jumps around and like just like bangs himself against the wall and then keeps running after Joel was freaking insane. And whereas in the game, it's just an infected running after you and he's just running straight and there's no like erratic activity. So I
And
feel like this was the first episode to really demonstrate how well they elaborated on the infected.
and again, that really comes down to the fact that in the game you are playing as a character, and combat is something that you need to give to the player in order to play the game. Whereas in a show, having too much of that and making it just seem like a frivolous activity would just that would be a pacing problem. That would be a major issue, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
I want to be clear because you keep bringing that up. I'm not complaining that there wasn't enough action, although
Oh, I know you're
I
not. I
do
know
think
you're
I
not.
do
I
think
know
the
you're not.
show probably could have done with a few more action scenes. But that's not like the main thing. The thing is
I
just the
yeah.
thing is they
To
choose to focus on they do it for too long.
yeah, I was just addressing the criticism that I've heard from others, like in general. Like
Yeah.
it was a general criticism from
Yeah,
people. And the second point that I wanted to make is that scene with is that going into episode 2? The scene with the little girl, right? And she's like kind of like not fully infected, but she is infected, but she's still like conscious. Is
I
that
think that's
episode?
The
episode 2. I think that's at the beginning of
the
episode
one.
2.
Well, wait. The one that like walks into the QZ and they
Yes.
check her and find out she.
Yeah.
That's the no. That's in episode 1,
Oh, it
the
Okay.
is.
start of the
Oh,
second
It
half.
is.
Yeah,
Right. So
it's when the time jump, the 20-year time jump happens.
I thought that was a really effective way to elaborate on the story because it actually added a really deep emotional component that we didn't really see until we met Sam in the
Mm-hmm.
game. And like just to see like this decision that this QZ officer had to make, like to like put the down because she didn't know she was infected. She was just a lonesome kid and she didn't have symptoms yet. And when she took her temperature to like have to put her down, I just thought that was really like deep and emotional, and just the facial expression of the QZ officer was really intense, and you knew that she didn't want to do that and she felt bad about it, and it was a hard decision. And then later to see Joel with like the people he's working with at the QZ to have to like put that body in the incinerator to like burn it, like that's like I thought that connection was just really emotionally impactful.
yeah.
And
That's
another
that's a
thing,
good. I just so I can be a little positive. I do agree that that's a good addition, and it does help world building that is relevant to the story that's being told. Yeah.
yeah, because again, not to keep harping on what works in a video game and what works in a television show. This being a television show, and again, you're not in the shoes of Joel, it allows us to see the perspective of other characters that aren't our main character. So doing that kind of shows not just like the hard decision that this officer had to make, but kind of the cold and callousness of Fedra as a whole. It kind of sets that up for the audience to understand what kind of level of control they have over the populace, right? This little girl comes in and she evaluates, finds out that the girl is infected, and quietly, while trying to make her feel like she's safe and everything will be all right, we know that she won't
Yeah.
be.
I mean,
And
forget about just Fedra. It's just the world they live in now,
no,
where
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
has
for
to be like
sure.
that. It just sets up the dark tone
Mhm.
that this is a society that now has to prioritize survival, and when the hierarchy of needs is thrown into chaos, those are the kind of decisions people have to make for survival. And it
Yeah.
is a good addition because it cuts to the core theme of the original game, the individual versus the group.
Yeah, and I thought that this scene, among several other scenes, was a really good way of adding humanity to different factions, including Fedra, in a way that they just seem very villainous in the game.
And also, it's kind of a direct, like an immediate parallel to, we just see Sarah get gunned down, and it's an emotional moment. It's really sad. How did you guys feel about Pedro Pascal's performance in that scene, by the way? Oh boy, here we go.
Delilah, you can go.
I thought it was.
Unless you guys want me to.
I thought the scene was pretty 1-to-1. I felt like it was exactly like the game, and it made me cry again. Which
So go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, I was just gonna say, which is a good thing. Like I didn't really see any difference. I believed it.
Oh, we're talking about Sarah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm talking about Pedro Pascal's performance when Sarah was killed. And what I just, if I can just real quick preface,
go.
and like this is maybe something that you and I will agree on, Jason, is anytime the script for this show is ripped directly from the game and they repeat like the exact same lines that are in cutscenes in the game, they always come off weaker in the show.
Oh, of course, yes.
The performances in the game always stand above when it's the exact same lines being spoken. When Pedro Pascal is saying the exact same thing Troy Baker said in the game, I feel like he doesn't quite hit the right notes when he's saying that line.
No.
Same thing with Bella Ramsey versus Ashley Johnson.
No.
When it's the exact same line. That being said, though, that scene where Sarah gets shot and Joel is crying and mourning her death and like in denial about what just happened, I do think Pedro Pascal nailed it. It's not to me, it's not 1-to-1 like you said, Delilah, but it's like it stands on its own at just the right level, at just the same level as the one in the game.
Yeah,
I think it was really well done.
I mean, I I thought the death scene of Sarah was fine. It just didn't hit me the same way as the game still does. I don't think it's not even just delivery. It's the actors emoting and I find it wild that, like, not even that wild, that animated CG models seem to emote more than these actors. And the inflections in the voices, like you said, a lot of the times it doesn't hit as hard.
In certain scenes, I'll agree, but I don't. Not this one. I don't think personally.
But yeah, I mean, Sarah's death scene was fine here. But again, it's just fine. Meh. Like, it doesn't hit nearly as hard as it does in the game for me. But it's definitely the best part of the episode.
Oh,
I don't know.
Well. I'm trying to think of other interesting things to talk about with the first episode. We have to move on to other episodes, but I feel like with this first episode being so long, there is a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I did like the angle of because we know they very much set it up for Joel being a smuggler. He's trades with a federal officer some drugs for some ration cards, and at the end of the episode, that same federal officer is who finds him, Tess, and Ellie outside the QZ. And Joel has to make a snap decision to kill the guy. I thought that was an interesting connection to make that whole sequence a little more personal to Joel.
Yeah.
I could have done without the sudden flashback sequence to the federal officer aiming at him and Sarah.
Oh yes, I felt the same way. I felt like if they just showed the light on Joel's face and then did what they did, it would have been so much more effective.
This isn't the only time they do it throughout the show as well.
No, I think that is the only time.
We'll get to it later.
Okay, but I do think that was a little heavy-handed.
That
and
was
a
one
little
of the
unnecessary.
subtlety
That's what I mean.
examples
Yeah,
that I'm like, yeah.
That's what I mean when I'm talking in the beginning, subtlety and subtext.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. That definitely was a needless thing to do. We kind of glossed over. This is also when we get introduced to Ellie, Bella Ramsey playing as Ellie. What did you guys think of her introduction? It's quite different. Again, we're able to leave the shoes of Joel to see other characters' perspectives at different times, different points, different areas. And we kind of see her and Marlene's dynamic before they'd really know each other very well. What did you guys think about that?
Bella Ramsey's performance is excellent. I just felt like it was a little bit of a different Ellie. It was a more feral Ellie, more of a Last of Us Part 2 Ellie, which would make that transition make a little more sense than it does in the video game. But I feel like there's not enough there to get her to that place just yet, and she went there pretty quickly.
I mean, she does attack Joel in the game as well when he walks in the room.
Yeah.
Just as much as she attacked him in the show. I just think if we're given that already, that like that's our first introduction to Ellie in the game, as she attacks Joel when he walks in the room. Like, what's to stop us from thinking that she would be that hostile prior to seeing Joel? You know, in the game, I feel like we were kind of led to believe that Ellie and Marlene had a longer relationship than they actually potentially did.
Right. Right.
And like, there's no reason to make that assumption. I think we just all kind of did make that assumption. And I think the show, I don't know, I didn't mind the fact that she was a little more hostile and a little more on edge. Um, I personally had no qualms with it, and I do think we'll talk more about it as we go, but I do think Bella Ramsey's performance as Ellie was really great.
Yeah.
Jason, you got some thoughts? I
I
see
mean,
you pondering.
I felt the same way about Bella Ramsey as I did Pedro Pascal, where it's like it's fine, serviceable. It just there isn't the same depth to the inflection of the delivery of the lines. There isn't the same facial expression. Everybody kind of just looks vacant all the time. Um, yeah, I don't want to go. I don't want to go
Okay.
full because I could go full into tearing down Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey here. I don't think either of them are particularly good actors, but it's serviceable here.
Wow. I
And it's kind of a running problem I
okay.
had with this show where they're just constantly walking. Well, actually, Bella Ramsey does, I think, do a better job of trying to stay within the character. But there's also the problem that this show seems to have tried to give Joel a somewhat different arc and make him a different character. I
Times
don't know.
at times I will agree with that.
He's
In
not. He's not the game Joel. He's a very different character.
yeah,
Except for the 4 times the plot needs him to be an intimidating killer
I don't
for a
think
few
that's
minutes.
true. Like, I don't think that's that suddenly he switches, he flips a switch and suddenly he's game Joel versus. I think he can still be intimidating while also being a little more, having more of a sensitive side and showing that more often.
Well, that's the thing is that, and again, I hate because we're trying to judge it on something, but it's inevitable to talk about the game. Game Joel has a lot of anger and resentment buried underneath that shell that he's built up, whereas
Mm-hmm.
Pedro Pascal just looks like a dopey guy walking around that when he needs to, he's not intimidating at all. His voice isn't intimidating. He doesn't have that same presence. Like there are specific lines that they copied from the game that just fall
Well,
flat
yeah, and
because yeah.
those I agree with. Like, I definitely agree that a lot of the whenever the dialogue is ripped straight from the game, it
It
doesn't come
seems
off
like
right.
the show is very much going for a PTSD ridden versus a man that has a lot of trauma that hides that is basking in his anger and using it on others for survival's sake and hiding himself in a shell. It's just two very different characters in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. I don't agree entirely with what you said, but okay. Um, I think we can move on from episode 1. I think it's time to start talking about other episodes.
Yes.
Episode 2, this one has another one of those openings from the before times, I guess we could call them, with the mycologist in Jakarta being brought in to look at a woman who was bit and has the cordyceps virus, or cordyceps fungus rather, infected in her body. Um, and again, this is another one of those things where it's kind of setting up for the reveal next episode. And it's also just one of those, it's kind of like the literal definition of a cold open. It's an opening to the episode, and it's pretty fucking cold. Um, the episode ends with her saying the solution for to prevent this from outbreaking even more: bomb. You have to bomb the city.
Yeah.
And then she's just like, can you take me home? I'd like to be with my family. And then the episode begins. I thought that was a really, really good addition. And I think that if we kept getting those, Jason, to your point about just like filler or you know, having irrelevant parts of the story. If we kept getting those at the beginning of every episode, I could see it being a problem. But until the last episode, this is the last one we get, and I really like that because I feel like there's not much more for them to say about things pertain or happening before the events that our main characters are in. So what
If
did
I
you guys think about this
yeah,
opening?
if I can just say, just to what you just said,
Mm.
I don't the cordyceps stuff and the pre-world stuff. That's not the only filler. Actually, it's like the least egregious. But overall, I agree. Like I have the same thing to say about it. I did the opening of the first episode. I think it's very successful at what it's trying to do. I just don't think it's necessary. And honestly, it like harkens back. I've seen a few episodes of Chernobyl. I haven't seen the whole thing, but it does feel very much like Chernobyl, like those sections.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I can't criticize it at what it's trying to do. Only that to what the story is, and maybe I just need to get to terms with they're not, as we'll get into later, they're not trying to tell the same story. They very much depart in some
Oh
major ways.
no, I don't think that's true. They
Not
are trying to tell
the
the same.
overall arc, yes, but like the I don't know how to describe it.
Again, they're telling the same story, but they're doing it in a completely different format. They can't make it
Yeah,
one to one. There
I
has to
I
be additions, there has to be changes
no,
because it just
I
won't
get that.
work.
I get that.
Yeah.
Again, like I can't like fully go out until we get into later episodes. But
Sure, sure. So
yeah,
put a pin in that. But
yeah, put a pin in that.
Delilah,
But
what did you think of this opening?
I thought it just was another example of widening the scale, adding to the tension, making this seem more serious than was made to be in the game. Like, okay, the only solution to this is to bomb it, to literally kill everyone, to contain it so that it doesn't spread. And that's not something that was ever proposed in the game, which is fine. In the game, it didn't really need to, but I feel like for it added context that worked. Was it necessary? Probably not. Does it help like Joel and Ellie's story? Definitely not, but it definitely helps with like the world building and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of what these are doing. It's world building, right?
yeah,
And I
I
think
can
it
definitely
does it in
agree
a
with
really
you.
effective way.
I can definitely agree with you on that in terms of like setting up that this is a world, an Earth now where survivalism and Hegelian logic kind of rules, where it's the greater good kind of arguments. This might be seen as totally evil in today's world, but this has to be done. Like, and I agree with you on that point. Like I said, I think those scenes are like well done, well directed, and I get what they're trying to do. Like,
Yeah. Like and this isn't so these two opening scenes, like they're not so much a change as they are an addition.
mhm,
A change though would be them changing the spores to the tendrils that the cordyceps kind of
right.
spread with, which Jason, I already, I heard you're alluding to earlier. I know you have an issue with that.
I really do too, to be honest.
Oh,
Like,
Delilah, you have an issue with it too?
yeah, I
Well,
do.
I can tell you exactly why they made that change, and it's
So
because
that everyone didn't have to wear gas masks all the time?
Yeah.
yes, because it affects actors' pay and it actually like behind the scenes business wise, like
What?
there are
Pedro Pascal
ramifications.
is used to wearing a mask or helmet all the time.
Yeah, now I can see why they made that creative choice for the Mandalorian. Seeing him,
Yeah.
but
Uh,
no, jokes aside, that's like the real reason why they did that, so that you see these actors' faces. Um,
I do think I do kind of think it is. It's not a change. It's a change I could take or leave, right? I don't hate it. I don't love it. I do think it is a little interesting, especially toward the end of the second episode where all the infected are alerted to their presence because they step on a tendril and the whole hive mind is kind of alerted to their presence. And I do think that like that to me makes sense, right? Making it more of like a hive mind, everything, all the fungus, all the fungi, the cordyceps, it's all connected. And if something happens in one place, they'll all be alerted to it.
yeah,
I think that makes for a more tense situation in the show that still allows us to see the characters' faces.
Yeah.
Um, I
My
could
problem isn't that it doesn't make sense. My problem is that it opens the door to many questions that break verisimilitude of the world they're setting up. For instance,
sure,
they
like how
talk
do they never step on that stuff?
yes,
And
like
yeah,
they talk all the time about how it's been growing under the earth, it's going through sewers, tunnels. How far does it reach? Who yeah, like they say you can just be walking around and they can find you. Why aren't we seeing them all the time? Like it just opens Pandora's box, if you know what I mean.
so it sounds like this concept needed a little more world building to work for you, Jason.
Actually, yes. Like
Dead ass.
you need to give like
That was
explanations.
half a joke and half a serious
Yeah,
suggestion.
because later on they imply that a certain QZ was able to keep them underground. How are you able to do that? Why can't they just pop up right in the QZ? Like
Yeah.
all these questions that just are generated by trying to answer something that need to be answered.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me, I was open to the idea when they introduced it, but then their way of executing it and showing it didn't really resonate for me. Like there was that scene that I did like visually only, where all the cordyceps are kind of moving in kind of like a wave when they're looking over the roof. Because they're communicating with each other and they're all moving like as the sun is moving and stuff like that. I thought visually that was cool, but it didn't really do anything in terms of like adding tension or like adding anything to the world, what was going on. I felt like the ways that they execute it, which one example is actually at the end of this episode with Tess, was actually kind of corny, and I
oh
actually
yeah.
would have preferred that they just showed it in more interesting ways, and they never did really throughout the show.
I also just think, and this isn't really like a huge thing, but I always thought in the games the aesthetic nature of the spore hallways and whatnot like really added a lot to making it its own unique thing, not just another zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still think this is unique. Like, it's definitely still unique and creepy that these tendrils are coming out of the mouth. I definitely could do without the scene where Tess and the one infected have a makeout session.
It took so
Um
much away from that character, dude.
Well,
it
yeah,
it was
there's
just
a
such a
reason
weird moment.
you don't see her die at all in the game. Like you just hear the gunshots.
Yep.
I mean, okay, so and to be fair, like I don't mind the change of the infected being the ones to come in and Tess desperately like lighting the lighter and setting them all aflame. Like that I don't mind. It's just the makeout
Same.
session was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is another
So good. We
criticism.
all agree on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can agree on that.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't imagine there were many people that liked that scene. That was
I
just
honestly
strange.
think they just did Tess dirty, period. Like she was a great actress. Like she definitely got the
Yeah.
vibe of Tess, but I thought the subtlety of Tess's and Joel's relationship worked better in the game where it wasn't so explicit. And this is another example of subtlety that I agree with Jason with. We didn't need to see them laying in bed together. Like that was implied in the game, and I felt like it took the weight away from her last words that were in the game versus here. Like I felt like her last words of being like, we went through enough that this has to mean something. And that weight just wasn't there in her last moments in the way that it was in the game, and it just took away from her character. It made her seem less badass than she was, and it just took away the weight of their relationship. I felt like the subtlety added to it, and those last words.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. For the most part. I did definitely think that we could have done, like you brought up the scene where they lay in bed together. I definitely think we could have done without that. Because I feel like there's other moments in the show that are still not very subtle, but I still think paint a better picture of their relationship.
Yeah.
Like we'll talk about it in the very next episode. The letter that Bill leaves for Joel, use this stuff to take care of Tess, and he as Ellie's reading the note, she stops when she sees Tess's name, and Joel is visibly bothered. I I like that a lot more to show their relationship. I like that kind of thing a lot more than I like her coming and cuddling with him in bed.
Yeah.
I can agree with that kind of being. I could do without it.
Yeah.
That's basically what I'm saying. One other thing that I do want to bring up from episode 2, actually, I guess two other things. There's two things that I would like to talk about. I initially didn't like this, and now I've kind of come around on it and rewatching the show. How episode 1 ends with them not really talking about the fact that Ellie's infected. and that being saved for the beginning of episode 2. But I kind of get it and understand, like, they needed to get out of that situation before more Fedra soldiers show up. And then episode 2, when it cuts back to them, immediately opens with them being very cautious of her and kind of just interrogating her as to, like, why the hell are you infected? What the hell is going on? A change that I kind of actually liked, because in the game it kind of just happens right there in the rain when they really should be running away.
Right.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't disagree with that? Is that what you said, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
double negative. I agree with that.
No.
Yeah.
It's your audio just cut out for a second, so I
Oh,
wanted to make
sorry
sure
about
that
that.
it's all good. And then the other thing, just to talk about something really cool from the episode, was them going through the museum and experiencing the clickers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so episode 2 is probably where I'll be most positive because it
Okay.
was the one episode where I was actually, aside from that opening 10 minutes and what we just talked about with how they did Tess's ending,
Hmm.
I thought it was a great episode overall. The tension building was done very well. The scene with the clickers done very well. I was very invested, and I felt like when I got to that episode, not really knowing anything about the show, not having followed it when it came out, I was like, okay, so the first episode kind of a fluke. They kind of padded it because it's a TV show, whatever. All right, now we're kind of in this feels like the game. I feel like it should feel. Um,
That felt straight up like stealth gameplay.
yeah,
And it was done
exactly.
so well with the clicker sounds and the way they designed the museum was I felt like I was playing the game. It was very good. Even the
Yeah.
perspective of like Joel like reloading his shotgun was so done well.
Hmm.
And just like how careful he was being. I think it was just his revolver, right? Um, how careful he
Oh,
was
you're right.
being.
It was the revolver.
Yeah,
Sorry.
he was thumbing the 38s
Yeah.
into the
and
barrel.
and
Yeah,
just
or
being
not
very
the barrel.
careful to be very quiet about discharging the empty the empty casings and putting new ones in. It was just a very tense encounter. It was very, very well done.
Yeah, there was a lot of
Um,
attention to detail. It even like looks like the scene in the game looks in terms
yeah,
of
yeah,
the museum. Yeah, that
and
felt like a great. For the most part, like episode 2, I don't have too much aside from what we already talked about at the beginning and the end. Yeah.
yeah. So that being said, it's time to move on to probably the most contentious and controversial episode of the show,
Oh boy.
episode 3. And I want to open it up by just saying, like, this is where we get the reveal. Joel talking to Ellie about like how the outbreak happened, and he's basically explained, which this is the theory that people were thinking from episode 1 and wound up being correct. Um, Cordyceps made its way into a flower factory in Indonesia. That flower went out to the entire world, and people started slowly eating the flower, using the flower and things, getting infected, and it started slowly making its way east. Everyone started getting infected. Um and I thought, again, I think world building wise, I think that's really, really cool. And it doesn't really come up again. It's like it purely is there for world building. It purely is there. It's not like we needed that explanation, but it was really interesting to get it. And
Yeah.
it contextualized or at least the second episode's cold open, like, really, really well. And just, it kind of answered the question that some people did have, and it was like a kind of a legitimate question.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
Jason, I take it you didn't like this, though.
No, I mean, again, I have the same problem. Like it's fine,
Okay.
but as we already said regarding the previous episode, the way
Yeah.
they depicted cordyceps here opens more questions than it answers.
No, yeah, that'll, and again, I will agree with that. But I think as far as just how the outbreak occurred, I think it's a
Yeah,
really interesting bit of world building that I kind of appreciate a lot.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
from the way they kind of connected to like the world economy is so interconnected in that way in terms of like food and stuff that like something
mhm.
from Jakarta so easily before they even knew what it was spread everywhere. Yeah, like it works. That's believable. Yeah, like it's just all the other questions it opens that breaks the
Yeah.
verisimilitude for
I
me.
mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, as far as the tendrils things go, I think we're all pretty much on the same page that,
yeah.
it's not the best way to handle it, but for television, I get why they did it instead.
Hmm.
And now for the actual controversial part of the episode. How did we feel about the whole episode basically being a very personal story about Bill and Frank? And a much happier, optimistic version of
Yeah.
their story than the game was.
So can I just say something real quick?
Sure.
Okay, because I'm not on Twitter and a lot of these other things. So like when it comes to Bill and Frank and like the whole like gay, like there was apparently a whole lot of like drama about
Well,
homosexuality and yeah,
there were a ton of homophobes that
yeah,
kind of crept up
all right,
and started review bombing the show because they hated seeing a love story
yeah, 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 yeah,
two gay guys.
yeah. All right. Bill was gay in the game. Okay,
Yes, they
so
were both gay.
let's just fucking set that aside.
Yeah.
Bill's purpose from a structural point in the game was that he was the shadow. So if Tess is the one who's urging Joel to go on the hero's journey, so to speak, to go achieve this good because they're shitty people and they can at least do this one good thing, Bill is supposed to represent the opposite of that, where he is the shadow. He reflects if Joel continues down the current path he's on, the end point, which is that Bill is completely alone. Everybody he cared about has either abandoned him or is dead, and he's just alone wandering around in his trap-ridden city. They obviously didn't want him to serve that function here, and honestly, he really can't because Joel has already. Did they actually say they were married? Because I saw people saying that they were married in the show.
Who? Joel and
Tess and
Tess, or
yeah, Joel and Tess.
No,
I
I
don't
didn't get that.
know. Yeah.
I mean, even just
I
them
mean,
being in bed
what does
together.
it mean to be married in a
Yeah, yeah.
post-apocalypse, you know?
I mean, Delilah already pointed out, like them being in the bed together already kind of like undermines the original arc, which is why I say it's a very different character.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess it doesn't even really make sense to have Bill serve that purpose here. My main contention with the show, aside from a lot of like, you guys have talked a lot about world building, this episode in many ways shatters that world building and the tone of the world that they set up. My main problem is just that there's no real conflict the entire episode. And anytime there seems to be conflict beginning between Bill and Frank, it's resolved within 5 seconds.
I don't think it
And so you're just
needed
really
that.
watching like two people in love growing old together, and it was just kind of boring.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't think there needed to be conflict, and I didn't. I'll say that I felt like the episode was a little longer than it needed to be. Um, Really, I think the thing that we miss out most from this episode being the way it is we don't get to have a very angry bearded Nick Offerman
Yeah, yeah, that too.
yelling and bitching at Ellie for any of the episode, because their dynamic in the original game, Ellie and Bill's dynamic, was
His fan
probably
favorite part, yeah.
it was probably my favorite dynamic of the original game. They're they're practically the same person, and they clash because of it. And it's really interesting to hear that dynamic unfold. We don't get that here. Bill is like still a bitter, angry dude. That you know, he's a conspiracy theorist. He's skeptical of everything. He's got surveillance cameras.
And yet the first person who falls into one of his traps, he's like, okay, you can come in.
Uh, I'm not gonna sit here and
Yeah, there's a whole host of stuff you can get into with the way Bill's set up, like no reader. Like there's so many holes in the world that just the episode feels like it takes place in a Fantasyland utopia in the middle of the
it does. Well,
post-apocalypse.
I think because they don't show they only show one infected walk into his traps, and I think that's kind of all we need. We don't necessarily need like their neighborhood to be constantly surrounded by gunshots and explosions from Bill's traps. Maybe it could have
I-
done,
I'm not even
huh?
talking about that. I'm just talking about like the one time that we see raiders come in. First of all, Bill is an idiot. He goes out into the middle of the
Yeah,
road with a bolt action
that I
rifle.
think that's the thing that
Yeah,
everyone complains about with this episode, is that raiders are there and Bill is just standing in the middle of the street. Like,
with
of
a bolt
course he's
action
gonna get
rifle.
shot.
We know
Yeah.
he has semi-automatic combat rifles downstairs in the basement, but he chooses a bolt action rifle that is meant to be fired from a crow's nest.
And I'll agree, that is the most egregious flaw of this episode.
But
It just
Fedra, no warlord faction ever saw all these extremely valuable resources that he has stockpiled and thought to take.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: is like maybe the setup at the very beginning was to show just how trap laden it was around that neighborhood, that like people tried, wised up, and did not bother because Bill grew himself a reputation. Like you could go ahead and surmise that as a possibility. I think it's
Yeah,
fair.
I mean, I think the primary reason that I didn't buy into it was simply because there was nothing really else going. Like I prefaced with, as I didn't feel like there was any conflict to the episode, so I wasn't invested. Because like, what's the story if there's no conflict? And I don't just mean necessarily external conflict, character conflict. Like,
I mean, I guess the conflict would be that with this all being a very long flashback sequence showing the progression of Bill and Frank's relationship, the conflict was how Bill got introduced to Joel and Tess, how that connection kind of began, and it was that Frank was just talking on the radio with people, and like you see that whole scene with Bill and Joel kind of like mad eyeing each other across the table with their hands on their guns, ready to pounce at any moment.
mhm.
And I guess like you could count that as a conflict both between Bill and Joel, and Bill and Frank for introducing these people to them. But I mean, I don't think that episode needed like a major conflict personally. I didn't really have an issue with it in that regard. I think it worked to I think I do definitely prefer the more pessimistic take from the game, which we don't have to talk about here. And it's much darker. It is much,
Right, and
you
that's
know.
that's that's probably my ultimate problem with the episode is it's tone breaking for me.
Yeah, I could see that a little bit, but I still think it had there was a lot of good in that episode, particularly in the ending when they're reading the letter Bill left behind. And again, I think that does a much better job at selling us on Joel and Tess's relationship with a lot more subtlety than her getting into bed with him.
Yeah.
I think that is really really good.
For me, this episode was like, it was so, the performances were amazing. I thought it was a great story. I cried more than I cried in any other episode, like literal like panting cries, because of the performances and because of the story. But this straight up and down was not Bill, and I wanted Bill, and they picked the perfect actor to be who Bill is. When I
Yeah,
saw it was Nick, I was like, oh, yo, this is perfect. And he
Yeah.
was not Bill at all. This was not in any way, shape, or form Bill. This was my moment of levity in the game. This was my moment of seeing this like crazy, batshit crazy badass. He wasn't crazy. He was a little crazy, but not really. Like, they didn't demonstrate that well in this episode. He
Yeah.
was a lot more tender and stuff like that. And I think if they had this episode with completely different characters as like an additive thing, I would have been more okay with it, but like, give me Bill, and I
But
didn't get Bill.
I will
then
say,
it would be an irrelevant episode, you know, it wouldn't tie into the plot at all, which that's kind of the catch-22 you have with this, right?
Yeah. And
Go
so
ahead.
I'm conflicted within myself. Like,
yeah,
as
Yeah.
contentious as it is among people, like, I feel like it's such a good
Well,
episode, but
to
it
be
also,
fair, the reasons we don't like it are not for the reasons why this episode is mostly contentious, which is
people
just that.
people are gay. Ellie's gay. We'll talk about it.
Yeah,
Like, come on, who
some
cares?
surprise gay
we'll
people
talk about
exist.
it.
Oh no.
I will say that I always forget his name, the guy who plays Bill in this, and he was from Parks and Rec and whatnot.
Nick Offerman.
Yeah, he's probably up there with the actors who played. Well, obviously one of them, ironically, is Ashley Johnson, and the actress who played Marlene for like the best actor in the whole fucking show. Like, his performance isn't the issue; it's just the material I think he had to work with. It was just
I
kind of
mean,
like, it was almost like a respite at the very beginning of the story.
yeah,
It
and
felt very out of place.
I get that. And like, yeah, I think ultimately our issues with this episode, without saying that it's by any means a bad episode, like it was I think it was a very good episode of television. It was very heartfelt moment to watch. Um, but there is a lot of missed opportunity in not having the Bill that we had in the game bounce off of Joel and Ellie, and you know, we miss out on some really really interesting opportunity there.
It also kind of devalues the scene where Ellie's going through his porno mag, because it means more because we know she stole it after he specifically points out for her not to touch them.
She might have just found it in the truck.
No, they do find it in the truck in the show, but I'm saying
Yeah.
that little bit has a little less value because of that.
Oh, I mean, I don't really care about the fact that like I don't care where she gets the magazine. I think
No,
it's
no,
it
no. I just think in the game it works a little better because it's funny because we know
because she
specifically
breaks the
Bill.
rules.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
Bill specifically like gets on her about going through his stuff in the back.
yeah.
Yeah,
I get it. I get it. But and you know, I guess back to the point real quick, and then we should move on because we have 6 more episodes to
yeah,
cover
yeah.
it. Back to the point of like Bill letting Frank out of the hole and kind of giving him a meal and a shower and whatnot. Like, I think at first I was a little iffy on this. Rewatching the episode, I've come around on it a lot. Like, Bill is obviously a if not a conservative, like a libertarian, he's more like he's a closeted gay man that is not comfortable in his own skin because of a lot of his beliefs don't really mesh with his sexuality, um and his beliefs don't matter anymore because government's gone, the world has ended. Like, all he's kind of left with is his wants and his desires. So seeing a man he's attracted to who be in a hole, who he's still very skeptical of, but again he's attracted to him, like I don't really fault that whole situation of him still being on edge about whether or not he can trust him, but kind of playing the field and seeing where that whole situation can go. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I want to emphasize, like, I probably would have let that go, but then it's like they have the argument about resources, like valuable resources in a survival situation that
Yeah.
Frank wants to use to decorate the neighborhood, which no, it's the apocalypse. Like,
Yeah.
of course, no, but
Yeah, but to
within
be
five
fair,
seconds,
it is kind of
Bill just caves. Like, and that's how it goes with every single thing.
to be
And
fair,
I,
it is their like very well protected little slice of heaven. Like I kind of get it.
for me, it doesn't. I can see why it works for other people, but for me, it just doesn't work because, like, I feel like it almost like I was so into the second episode, like I said, for the most part,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as I said, and then it's just that, and I'm like, why are we taking a break? We just got started.
Delilah really wants to say
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I
go.
was just gonna say, and honestly, like it was like a protected little bubble for Bill as well in the game. The thing is, Bill was like a lone wolf. He didn't need anybody. He didn't want anybody, and that was like a major part of his character, including his own like man, Frank, in the game.
Hmm.
And so like to like leave that town knowing that like he's good because like he's has all these traps and he's been surviving by himself. And then moving on as Joel and Ellie, like even until this day, we know like Bill is out there somewhere surviving, living his best life in his little town with his little traps. And I just like love that aspect of that character. And I just felt like that shit was just, I don't know. I liked the episode. I just didn't like it for Bill.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I totally agree with that. All right, let's talk about episode 4. And this has uh the changes in this are once again going back to what I was saying before of this you not being in the shoes of Joel. Like, it lets you jump around and see other perspectives and see more going on. And this kind of gives us a little more world building about a militia in this world. Um they changed the setting from Pittsburgh to Kansas City in this case. I think mostly just because of the
Location, and they were driving.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And frankly, like Kansas City puts them a little more west. Like it kind of gives the impression that they've been traveling for longer. Um
Hmm.
Not that that is particularly important, but you know, I don't mind that change, but we're kind of introduced to this militia that we come to learn a lot about the fact that they took over the Fedra occupation in that city, and we learn about the leader Kathleen, her second in command, whose name is I have it here,
He's
Perry,
bearded man.
who is I don't know if you guys noticed or
Thought- As
recognized.
soon as I heard him, I was like, oh, that guy should have been Tommy.
Yeah, that Perry is played by Jeffrey Pierce, who voiced Tommy in the original game. So you know, another actor from the original game still having a role, just a different role than what he portrayed in the in the game. But how did you guys feel about this backstory, this kind of expansion of the location that they're in, and like getting more characters involved and finding out more about like some certain backstories, particularly Henry and Sam. We get a little more info about them. Well, mostly in the next episode, but we'll get to it.
I thought that it did a good job in once again humanizing some of what seemed to be just villains in the game and having their motivations be a little bit more dynamic and understandable. But I felt like some of the performances in this episode were really weak. I felt like the main lady, Anna, I think her name is, she tried to be
Kathleen. Her name's
Kathleen. My bad.
Yeah.
Sorry, these
It's okay.
generic names. I felt like Kathleen tried too hard to be like Negan, who is a very cool villain in The Walking Dead, and it just didn't hit. It wasn't believable. I didn't enjoy
She
it.
comes
While
off as an idiot. Yeah.
yeah, it just I don't
Wow.
like it. Like she tried. Yeah, it was.
Every decision she makes undermines the threat I feel from that gang versus them, because they're all dumb. And why are all these heavily armed men following this dumb woman around who shoots a doctor, a trained medical professional who would be a invaluable asset to their group after they've
And
overthrown Fedra?
he even points that out to her, like, I'm a doctor, you
He,
wouldn't kill me. But
he
like,
gave birth to you, basically.
Like, why
yeah,
is this
I
bearded
birthed
guy?
you.
Why did this bearded guy or none of the other people just at some point shoot her and take control, which is what would realistically
well,
happen?
if if I
I don't.
can if I can play devil's advocate, maybe it speaks to the fact that this was a group that rose up and took over the Fedra occupation, overthrew it, and started occupying the city themselves. And maybe a lot of the bad, poor decisions she makes for the group, and the fact that they all follow her in spite of these decisions, maybe it's trying to say that they didn't know, even though Fedra was like horrible, like we come to
Yeah.
really get the idea that Fedra in this city was worse than Boston.
Well, yeah.
um well,
This is.
hold on, let me
Oh,
finish my
yeah.
thought.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
like
Yeah.
with even though we know Fedra is terrible, like maybe it's trying to lean into the idea that maybe they didn't realize how good they had it, and maybe it's trying to lean into that they don't want to be ruled over anymore. They want to rule, but they don't. None of them really recognize the responsibility that comes with that, and maybe that's the story that those characters, that militia, is trying to tell.
Yeah. I would agree with you, and that's what I thought they were going for, especially when they portray how it was overthrown, where it's essentially just rule of the mob, witch trials, people who had any connection to Fedra being killed, burned at the stake. That's what I
Mhm.
thought they were going for. I, my problem with that interpretation is that it doesn't gel with the rest of the show because, and I hate to again go back to the game, but in the game there was no good faction. There was no clean faction.
Yeah.
Everybody was dirty. That was kind of the point. But the show very much goes out of its way, and this is the only thing I'll say about part two, to set up for part two in skimming over the failings of the Fireflies and vilifying Fedra. It's explicitly stated at some point in this episode that yes, these guys, this section, this quarantine zone of Fedra, they were known as like the Kansas Killers or whatever. Like they were extremely brutal,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, they somehow were able to keep the infection underground. So, like, yes, like I agree that maybe that was what they were going for, but given the way everybody else is talking throughout the remainder of the show and way things are framed, like it doesn't compute because of how they've clearly set up Fedra as a villain in this version of the story.
Okay. I mean, I don't entirely disagree with that. Delilah, do you have any more
No,
comments about? Go ahead.
I think it was effective in its writing, but in its performance, I didn't really like it that much.
Okay. And then one other thing I do want to bring up is just how they kind of, I do still like their Joel and Ellie's entrance into the city. I think it was about as close to the game as it was going to get, with the guy in the road screaming for help and Joel just going to run him down and them all getting shot at. That I One thing I do like because if they were to again 1-to-1 make this show as it was with the game, I do like how often they kind of shift around certain set pieces, and certain story events to happen at different key parts of the story. Like Ellie using the gun against the guy that was attacking Joel, like that happens a little earlier than it did in the in the game. And also just certain locations, like them going through a hotel, happened episodes ago. It doesn't happen here, whereas it would have happened here in the game. And it all comes down to moving things around so it all meshes well and is better paced in a show. I did want to point that out because I always found it really interesting when watching through the show, when certain things would be placed in different locations.
Right.
I admired it a lot because it was mostly done well, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Ellie's first kill, obviously, it's a lot less. Joel gets a lot less angry with her because he gave her the gun earlier in the show. He's a little more tender about it toward the end of the episode. And we also get some more information about Joel, something we'll come back to a little later, that Ellie notices that he doesn't hear as well in his one ear, which I thought was an interesting touch, especially because I feel like it's something that goes widely ignored in all sorts of media, video games, television, movies. Guns are loud. There's kind of a reason when you go to a gun range,
Yeah.
you have to put on protective earmuffs. Gunshots are not quiet. They're very noisy. You can go deaf from repeated unprotected sounds of gunshots. So I thought that was a neat little touch, and we'll circle back on that later.
I would have agreed that it was a neat touch if it wasn't a Chekhov's gun to a change they made later on in the story.
We'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Put a pin in
I'm
it.
interested to know what you mean by Chekhov's gun, because I know what Chekhov's gun is, and I don't know what you mean.
Or not necessarily. Chekhov's gun is really the only way I can phrase it. It's a setup for something that comes up later, episodes down the line.
But okay, we'll circle back.
Yeah.
Are we ready?
I just want to say my favorite part about this episode is the introduction of the pun book.
Yeah. I actually did think the pun book was a fun thing to throw in.
Yeah.
It is very much in Ellie's character.
Yeah, because in the game, actually, it's great that you brought that up, Delilah, because I think that really helps to show the progression of their relationship in the show. Because in the game, it's all pretty much optional. You have to really seek out those jokes if you want to hear them. By like roaming around in certain areas until Ellie decides to break it out and stuff. In this show, she breaks it out and is actively trying to engage with Joel on a personal level. And she's trying to get him to laugh. And slowly but surely, he starts laughing at her jokes. Yeah. And that kind of helps with the pacing. We're not going to be spending as much time with these characters as we would in the game, because the game is just inherently longer. So having those moments of levity where they do kind of come together on the same level in terms of humor, I think it was a really, really well incorporated way to include those pun books.
Yeah. My only criticism is that they are a little inconsistent as to like what Ellie and other people her age know and don't in this world. So like they know what mermaids are, but they don't know what a screenshot is. It's just kind of weird.
Well,
and the same thing with the music that Ellie is able to know. It's like from the 60s or 70s.
Well, hold on, because the world ended in this show. This is something we didn't bring up. The world ended in this show 10 years earlier than it ends in the game.
In the 90s, you had Destiny Child posters in Sarah's room.
Well, so it was 2000 in the game. It was 2013, and when the outbreak happened, and then 2033 was when the game took place. Here, it's 2003 and 2023 is where the bulk of the show takes place. So it's like, no, not really many people would know what a screenshot is unless and especially not Ellie. She's never been on a computer before.
That's a good point that I actually didn't think of. I've completely forgot that they turned back the timetable.
Yeah.
So that is a good point. But I'm just talking broadly speaking, like, because Ellie was born in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess to be fair, it does seem like a lot more of the old world was preserved in the show than it is in the game. In terms like they talk about having libraries and stuff. So that might just be me nitpicking. Probably is. I'm an asshole, but
But we love you anyway, Jason. All
yeah,
right, are we ready to go on to the next episode?
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so this is where we really get a lot of. I mean, Sam and Henry hold them up at the end of the last episode, so we get their backstory here, and we get there's a lot of changes with Sam in this show. First of all, he's deaf, and second, he has leukemia, and I think it's an interesting backstory to give the character. I don't know that it was
Well, I
necessary.
was a bit confused. Is he mute as well?
Well, deaf people tend to not talk.
No,
They
but it's implied that he lost his hearing at some point, wasn't it?
Oh, I don't know if it's implied that he lost it or if he was always
Because
deaf.
I was confused if he was just born a deaf mute, but then they bring in the leukemia thing. Did he lose his hearing? I mean, it doesn't really
Yeah, I
matter. It
don't
just confused me. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I think the fact but from a storytelling perspective, I think the fact that he's deaf kind of adds a little bit to just the tenseness of sneaking around. They have to make certain concessions with him not being able to hear things, and the leukemia adds just an extra bit of desperation behind Henry's backstory, where he was kind of a snitch for Fedra, the militia's gunning for him, and he was just doing what was best for his brother.
right.
Whereas in the game, there's not really. It's
In the
just them
game,
trying
he
to get out of the city. There's not really
yeah.
any. There's not much there other than they're just trying to get out. Um,
Henry in the game is basically almost the same type of character as Joel. Like there's
mhm.
that
I was
scene
gonna
where he
say that.
there's
Yeah.
the scene where he tells Sam to put the toy down because they don't need it. Again, like the survivalist
Yeah.
mindset. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like he's still mostly the same as Joel here. But he is a little more mindful, I guess, of the fact that Sam is a kid. They also do spend a good chunk of the episode in hiding, so
yeah,
um,
they had to kind of change them to make it work with the entire background that they set up with the
yeah,
QZ being overthrown, with the whole rat thing and everything. You know, he's basically
mhm,
a rat being hunted down. Which
yeah.
again, if you just threw over the QZ and you know there's a whole thing of monsters underneath the ground, why wouldn't you focus on securing the QZ just like the bearded dude
Well,
said?
again, because
Yeah,
they set up for Kathleen to just be on this blind revenge quest, and all other considerations secondary, right? Like she just cares about getting the revenge for her brother being killed.
Yeah.
right.
Um, so it's not logical. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that it's a logical choice to make, but it does help explain like why she made some of the really bad decisions that she made. Um,
And I feel like the show as a whole, every character that you meet just further cements the complexity behind the very final decision in the last episode, more so than the game did, which I thought was like good and effective because it really gets you
Oof,
thinking.
oof. We'll get there.
Yeah.
okay.
But this was my favorite episode actually.
Oh,
Like
okay.
my number one, yeah, for sure.
I think it's up there for me. Yeah.
I mean, like I'd say it's my because I already said the second was my favorite by
Hmm.
far. I'd say this would be minus the leader. What's her name? The leader of the
Kathleen.
Kathleen. Minus that stuff is probably my second favorite, just because it's mostly the spirit of it is unchanged from the game. The Henry Sam stuff. Obviously,
Yeah.
the context is different to fit in with that.
Right.
Um, and it does feel like it. And I actually thought that, while for the most part the deaf mute change, or deaf or whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
leukemia change, it didn't really add that much. It did add in the end. I thought that scene between Sam and Ellie after he's bitten worked really well, using him writing out. I thought that was really nice. I just like, at least they used it to do something effective in a visual. I mean, like, video games are a visual medium, but like in a television show context.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
go ahead, Delilah.
No, I was gonna also say it also made sense of why, like, because him and Ellie were sharing a room in the game as well, and he didn't react to any noise that she made. Um, in the game or the show, but in the show it makes sense because he can't hear even if he's infected. So it would make sense that he doesn't hear anything and he doesn't react, and he's just kind of sitting there as a kind of docile infected, um, boy.
Yeah. And I also I initially didn't like this. I've since come around on it. Ellie trying to put her blood into his wound in an effort to heal him. Um, it just shows the how naive she is. She desperately wanted to help him. That's the only way she could think of that would maybe work, and she seemed so confident in herself, and it didn't work. And the end of the episode, after Joel buries the bodies, she's just like, all right, can we just go? Like, she doesn't want to linger on it anymore because
Yeah.
she's just so disappointed and feels so defeated in that moment.
And
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Delilah.
no, I was just gonna say it just also further cements her want to save like the world and to use her own like immunity to save the world. Whereas that was a little bit more subtle in the game. Like we got that sense in like a piece of dialogue during the giraffe scene in the game, but here like there's a few moments where it's like, no, like this is what Ellie would have wanted. And this was one of those scenes for sure.
Yeah, I will say, to be fair to the show, as much as I feel like I feel like it's a completely different character from Joel. And forget about the actors and their performances, just the way things are structured and written. I actually feel like this game did way more characterization with Ellie, who in the game was more. She The game is about Joel. It's his story. Ellie is obviously a pivotal side character to that. This show obviously is doing a lot more Ellie characterization, I would presume, for the inevitable second season.
I wouldn't say that the game is a game about Joel. I think it really is about that relationship, about both of those characters equally.
But
I don't
I'm
think it's a
saying it's his arc. Like, Ellie doesn't really have an arc in the game. She doesn't really have much of an arc here either.
that's
Um,
sure. I'll give you that. Yeah, Joel definitely has a very clear arc, and Ellie not so much. But
she does have a little bit of one, like in terms, depending on how you interpret the very end of the game slash show.
mhm,
But
yeah,
they do more Ellie characterization in the writing here, as Delilah just pointed out, that I
mhm,
think actually works.
yeah.
If I'm trying to be fair.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. And we didn't talk much about the infected that we kept talking about them being underground. They unearth themselves, and I think that makes for one of the coolest set pieces in the entire show.
Yes.
All the infected. We see a bloater for the only time in the show. It's very cool, tense moment to watch unfold. Did we all view this positively? Did we all
No,
like
yeah,
this
this was
scene?
excellent. This was my favorite scene.
Okay.
Also, just like the infected in the show are more varied than the infected in the game. In the game, it's a lot of like copy paste clickers. Like you have the male one and the
Yeah, I mean,
female one, and they're all
that's kind of
adults.
the
And
that's kind of the nature with video game design. You have to
yeah,
reuse a lot of assets.
yeah. But I feel like this one, like we had a kid, and that kid was like a contortionist in real life, and she did like some
Yeah.
crazy shit in the car, and it was like really creepy to see. And I would like for them to include like kid infected in like Last of Us Part 3 or whatever.
Mhm.
Because I thought that the infected in this show like looked really, really incredible. And that scene was awesome. It was better than any infected scene we had in any of the games.
Yeah, the whole kid thing probably won't happen purely because it raises too many eyebrows of the idea of killing kids in a video game. Um, I'm just saying it probably won't happen,
To
even
kill
though.
the kid, just let the kid be a part of a cutscene or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
something that's like in passing where we don't have weapons on us or
yeah.
something.
But
I don't know.
I definitely take your point and agree that like it is cool with the fact that this isn't a video game. You just have like a pool of 100 extras or whatever to choose from and put makeup on, and they all feel really unique. It does
Yeah.
make it feel very believable. Um, all right, are we good to keep it rolling? Next
Oh,
episode?
Mhm.
wait. We can't
What?
move on without talking about Ish in this episode.
Oh yeah, well the one subtle nod to the whole ish backstory or side story or whatever you want to call it. yeah, underground, seeing the little school. I did think that, again, that's one of those things where it's like a
That
really
was
cool
fan
touch,
service.
right? Pure fan service.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very much enjoy that.
Which, if you're watching and listening to this and you haven't played the game, but you only watch the show, that was just basically a story that was told through documents that you read through your journey with Henry and Sam.
And also, like, they do openly acknowledge the whole idea that, like, the infected were driven underground, and they go underground, and they talk about the fact that there's no infected down here. Where did they all go? What happened? So just to kind of talk, that they kind of do acknowledge that subplot and that how things have kind of changed. Like, who knows? Maybe Kathleen already knew that they were all driven out or
Mm,
elsewhere. Maybe that's why she didn't view it as a concern. But we also see the scene where you see the floor underneath the one building like breathing. So
yeah.
Right.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that they set that up ahead of time because otherwise the ending then would have just kind of felt like De Ex Machina. But
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Episode 6. Man, we got to keep rolling. I really liked the opening to that episode of them holding up the indigenous couple.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that couple was just the sweetest and coolest couple of people.
Hell yeah. They were mad
Um,
funny.
yeah, I thought that was a nice way to open the episode. But Jackson, I really like how they leaned into just taking full on this is the one part of The Last of Us Part 2 that I'll openly acknowledge, and that's that Jackson looks like it does in The Last of Us Part 2 versus how it does in the first one.
yeah, because
Yes.
in the
Um,
first one it's pretty much just the dam, if I remember
yeah, you
correctly.
Yeah.
really it really doesn't it feels like a totally different location, and like it's clear setup for the fact that Jackson's going to be a more important location in part 2 or
Yeah.
season 2 of the show. Um but yeah, I thought that was a nice touch, and I really liked the disdain Tommy had at realizing that they are a communist society that Maria kind of points out.
Yeah.
Like, this is a
I
commune. We're
I I I,
communists.
I hate that line just because like it's clearly written by people who have never actually read like these documents like Marx. Like in pure communism, there is no government; it's anarchical. So to say we have a democratically elected government and we are communists is
I think
antithetical.
yeah, but I think she's going on the basis the
And she was
basis of
apparently a district attorney, so she should probably know that and have read those books at some point.
all right. Now you're nitpicking. But I think she's really just going on the very basic idea of communism as like
Yes,
uh
I
yeah,
understand.
having socialized possessions, nothing belongs to anyone. It's all shared. That's essentially what she was going for.
Yeah.
Um
This episode was cool because it was basically Easter egg the episode for fans of The
yeah.
Last of Us game. Like Ellie was wearing the same jacket that she wears. There's a character that we meet in The Last of Us Part 2 that was introduced here, which wasn't introduced in the first game.
I
So
hinted at, like, they weren't explicitly introduced, but you can kind of take guesses at who that character is.
yeah.
If you're talking about who I think you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um yeah, I feel like there's not much more to say about Jackson. I feel like there was more conflict between Joel and
Joel and Tommy.
Tommy than there
I don't.
was
Yeah,
between Joel and Ellie.
yeah.
Um Go ahead.
I feel like because in the game, that scene with Joel and Ellie, that is kind of the most pivotal scene in the entire game for Joel's
Yeah.
arc.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I don't like the way they changed the context. It's kind of weird. I don't like how they changed Tommy. Tommy was. I will say I like the actor who plays Tommy. At least he does a Texas accent the entire time, so it doesn't sound weird when he uses idioms from that part of the country. Um, but uh, but I don't like the fact that they take away the resentment that scene between Tommy and Joel, where it's very clear that Tommy has a lot of guilt for what they did and resents Joel for it. Um, and I don't like this. They replace Joel not wanting to go on because he knows that he'll grow attached with, oh, I'm old and weak and she'll be safer with you. And then he sits and we have another flashback where Joel is just sitting
Doesn't
pensively.
have a flashback.
Yeah, he literally after Joel and Ellie have the fight, there's just a scene of him sitting, looking pensive, and then you see flashes of Sarah.
Right,
I
because
literally watched
he
this like 2
saw
days
a
ago.
I
girl
did too.
of
I don't remember that.
he saw a girl that looked like Sarah
Well,
from
yeah,
the
there
back.
was
Yeah.
that. Yeah, there was that scene where there was a girl with very similar hair, and he saw Sarah when in actuality it was someone else. I guess, is that what you're talking about, Jason?
No, I'm just talking about the
Okay.
scene. So like right after the fight and right before Joel shows up with the horse and says, "Okay, no, I'll come with you." There's just a shot of him. It's not very long. It's like 15, 20 seconds of him just sitting in darkness, looking pensive, and you get flashbacks to Sarah. Yeah,
Well, okay. I
which
mean,
again feels like it's like just beating you over the head. Like I get it.
yeah. No, sure. I I'm not as against a more emotional and um sensitive Joel as you are, Jason, I feel.
Yeah, that is basically what it comes down to. Is that they're very different characters.
Yeah, but I liked the argument that he had with Tommy a lot, but I do agree that, I mean, another one of those situations where the performance in the game outdoes the performance in the show. Um, but I do think that scene, the pivotal scene with Joel and Ellie, I do think feels a little out of place, and
It's missing that key line. You're
yeah.
treading on some
Well,
mighty thin ice here.
I mean, it's also
Mhm.
just missing the whole fact that she runs away when she finds out Joel wants to leave her to
Right,
Tommy. Like
right,
that was the whole thing. She runs away to a ranch and they go and find her, and that's when they have that argument.
Yeah.
right.
Um, I think some of that additional context, some of those additional beats to get them to that point are just kind of lost. Um,
Yeah.
but they go to they I mean they do reconcile. We're given a little time of them together, like on the trip to the college or the university, and um the method of which Joel gets injured is definitely different. I think to save Pedro Pascal's back from uh getting injured.
And also for verisimilitude, because let's be honest, like what happens
Yeah,
to him in the
yeah,
game, and this is a common critique that I would actually agree is valid.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But this was well done, and sets us up for the next episode. Are we good to keep going? Any more comments
Yeah,
about? Okay, cool. Left Behind. How do we think Left Behind was handled? In
This is my
this in the
least
show.
favorite episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
my
Why?
I thought it was very dragged out, very boring. Actually, looking back on the game, like when I replayed The Last of Us Part 1 remake, I've realized that Left Behind is actually also boring. I like the
Okay.
coming of age story for Ellie, for sure. Like I like that it adds context to her character and her background and stuff like that for sure, but it definitely drags. And this dragged even more than the DLC.
Okay.
yeah, I pretty much concur with Delilah. I feel the same way about this episode that I did the actual DLC itself, which is like fine, not necessary, didn't add anything. Um,
Well, again, I think the main point of the DLC was just to add to Ellie's character and kind of reveal that that she's gay, and also um show us and give us more information, because she doesn't really elaborate much on Riley in the game. The only thing she says is at the end she brings up Riley was the first to die.
Yeah.
And we always knew that this episode, or that DLC was going to be incorporated into the show. I think it was mostly well done. I guess I liked the episode more than either of you did. I didn't find it to be terribly boring. Um, I do think it's just a little, since it's so condensed, it's kind of jarring how often the two of them get into a fight and then get out of the fight and then get into another fight and then get out of another fight once Ellie keeps finding out more information about why they're in that mall. Um,
Yeah.
but
But I
I think the final moments of that episode are really good, in particular. But go ahead, Delilah.
No, I was just gonna say what I did like about this episode is once again adding context and humanizing the different factions. So here it was like understanding like the different perspectives of the military school people versus the Fireflies. And I thought that this episode did a better job in kind of talking through different individuals' motivations within those factions and humanizing it
It's
more
it's
so than the
like
game.
it's like any political argument you would see on Twitter, but told from a couple of 14-year-olds. Which
Yes,
is it's kind of interesting to see them. They're very clearly shown to be kids in this episode, but they're trying to be older than they are. And we know that from Ellie. The seeing Ellie in the game, in the show, like, like, she's a young girl that's trying to act much older than she actually is. And I feel like this episode kind of shows that a little bit, because Ellie's in a Fedra school, and Riley ran away to become a freedom fighter,
Right.
yeah.
essentially. So, I guess I feel like there's not too much more to say about this one. Other than instead of imagining an arcade game, they get to play Mortal Kombat, which is
Oh
pretty neat.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Um,
No more angel knives.
no more angel knives, which I think is better. Like, to do Mortal Kombat or an actual arcade game, like, I think the whole imagination thing in the game was something that worked well in a game.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
all right, episode 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about David.
He still sucks. I mean,
um I think it was, again, this is something that allows the show to focus on the perspective of a different character, irrespective of the main character. It's really, really, really cool, and thus, by extension, really, really eerie to see David amongst his community and see, I guess, the respect that he commands. See the subtle, like, early in the episode, they're kind of subtle allusions to the fact that he's a pedophile, somewhat subtle allusions to the fact that they are cannibals. Although in the game, I think we're meant to believe that that the whole community is knowingly and willingly cannibals. In the show, I like the angle that he and his secret circle are keeping that very much a secret.
for sure.
Right. Like
Um,
in the show, it's what do you call it? Like, he slaps the little girl, and it's meant to be, yeah. Whereas in the game, they're just all cannibals doing what they can to survive.
right. Here he's taking care of his people, but he's not letting them all in on the secrets of their survival, and he's also just a big creep. Like, it's alluded to early in the episode that he's trying to be a religious father and also kind of a father figure, and not in the healthiest of ways.
Yeah.
um but I feel like it's mostly I feel like the episode, besides that whole angle, I feel like it's mostly the same as it is in the game. And I think overall very well done.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any other comments or things to bring up with this one?
The steakhouse scene on fire looked really cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I thought
Yeah.
actually just the show as a whole I thought did a good job in recapturing some locations in the game and environments.
Yeah, I talked about how I just appreciated how they're moved around in logical ways, but yeah, the overall, a lot of the set design is top notch.
Yeah.
And very, very indicative of what it looked like in the game.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention actually, I think it was the episode with Henry and Sam. They kind of loop back to that, like, was it a laundromat that they like fought the bandits, not the bandits, whatever. The scene with Joel and Ellie when
Oh,
she
where they come
first.
crashing in?
Yeah, is that a
Yeah.
laundromat? I feel like it's a laundromat, right?
Yeah, I think it might be. It might,
And
either
then
that or like a bodega or something.
yeah, something like that. And then in the next episode, they loop back to Henry and Sam's perspective of seeing that happen.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a good hint to how they might manage the show in Last of Us Part 2. which I think could work. But anyway, I really wanted to mention that,
Yeah.
and I totally forgot, so I'm throwing it in there now.
No, I appreciate that. That is something that's worth bringing up for sure. Yeah, because a lot of that episode took place with like flashbacks of Henry and Sam trying to escape, so it made sense for them to be some overlap and for them to be aware of Joel and Ellie's presence.
Yeah,
Obviously, they track them, and that's how they come to hold them up at the top of that one building. So,
yeah,
no, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
yeah.
We didn't
But
even talk about like the whole Henry killing Sam and then killing himself thing. I'll just say I think it was really well done.
Yeah, it was
Um, it's like Sarah's death scene where it's not quite the same. It's done differently, but it elevates itself to about the same level for me.
for sure.
But
yeah, I'd say
Absolutely.
just back to the David thing.
yeah. Sorry, we got a
The
little sidetracked.
the um the way they turned it kind of into like a Christian cult type deal with him like having been an aggressive guy but then finding God, like it just didn't seem to go anywhere. Like by the end of it, I'm just kind of like wondering where is everybody else, because they kill what is it Nolan North.
Troy
Troy
Baker.
Baker.
So the one thing I would say was kind of weird, because in the game, obviously because these are gameplay segments, they're
Yeah.
going. Ellie goes around, she's sneaking around, killing guys, stabbing them from behind. Joel beats up a guy, so it kind of makes a lot more sense when Joel shows up after Ellie, kills the shit out of David. Here, it's like there's apparently this whole community. Joel kills two of them when they go out to find him, and Ellie kills Troy Baker, and then kills David, very much like in the game. But then she just kind of like walks out. It's like, where is everybody else?
Well,
What's going?
to
Like, you know what
be
I'm saying?
I think the key difference is they made it so that the storeroom that she was being held in is connected to the restaurant. So like she runs out of the room down the hallway and she's in the restaurant where David calmly walks out and tries to kill her. Versus in the show where she leaves wherever she was and runs
Yeah,
through the town a little bit and finds herself in the restaurant. So I like that's kind of the key difference there. Um
yeah. And I guess it's another tone thing where, like you said before, in the game, everybody was knew what was going on. They were just trying to
yeah.
survive. So everybody in that gang kind of just seemed imposing. Whereas here, and this happens with a lot of the different characters, they try to humanize them more. But
Well, I
for
think a
me,
lot of the go ahead, sorry.
all I was going to say was, for me, it's kind of like tone breaking, because in the game, everybody was purposefully always having, like, masks over their face, wearing dirty clothes. Here everybody's like always like clean, and it's just weird. I wish it was a bit more grungy. I prefer in the game, but again, that's like a subjective thing. Like,
Yeah, I mean, well,
you like this expanded version, I didn't.
I think that with this community, they're building up that like David is successfully taking care of them. He's just not telling them what's going on, and a lot of the people seem to be on the more innocent side, right? They're pulling their weight not necessarily through hunting or combat or whatever. They're just doing filling other roles in the community. So like they send out the hunting party, and that very well to find Joel and Ellie, and that might have been the only like group of hunters that they have in that community.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe,
you
fair
know, like
enough. I just felt like it kind of just they kind of glossed over the fact that there's a whole community here, and
yeah, I
then
mean,
Joel and
I
Ollie
just
just
don't
kind of walk
think
away. Yeah,
I think that it's just the difference in the type of community where none of these people would be hostile. So if they see a building that's on fire, like they might wonder what's going on, but or maybe they're out gathering a way to put out the fire. But like the whole conflict is contained within that single building, so it's not
mm,
like too many more people could get involved. That's kind of just my take on it.
One change that I did like that this episode did versus the game is that ending scene where like David's on top of Ellie and trying to rape her or whatever, and then she like stabs the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Um, I think Joel in the game intervened,
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
he
well,
runs in and grabs
yeah,
her as she's chopping David up.
which I'm gonna disagree here and say I prefer that, simply because it's more impactful to have this man, cradling this girl as like the entire building, metaphorically, the world's burning around them. versus like she
Yeah.
kind of just stumbles out. It's more realistic in the show that she's just kind of stumbling out. Joel comes upon her, and she's kind of vacant and traumatized.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But
It's not a change that I necessarily like more or less. But I get the symbolism that you're talking about, Jason, and I feel like when I first watched the show, I definitely had more of an issue with it. Now rewatching, I'm kind of indifferent.
Yeah, and also for me too, it just helps ease the transition of Ellie in The Last of Us Part 1 to The Last of Us Part 2. Like
Hmm.
she is developing like hate, and like her trauma is just like she's getting more triggered like more and more as she experiences different
Yeah.
things. So it's just an easier transition, less abrupt.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of pulls us into the opening for episode well, actually, episode 9 opens a different way. I guess you guys ready to talk about the last episode?
Yeah, let's
yeah,
do it.
And I guess this is I don't know, Jason, how you're going to land with this, an answer to a question nobody asked, or maybe people definitely asked, but we've never really got an explanation for it. Um how is Ellie immune? And the answer is that her mother, who's played by Ashley Johnson, um,
great
uh,
performance from her, by the way.
yeah, great
One
performance
of
from
one of
her.
the better than many of the most of the actors in the show.
Yeah, her mother Anna was bitten just before Ellie was born. Like an infected attacked Anna. Anna stabs the infected, and then she looks down, and there's a baby on the floor. um
Yeah,
how did we feel about this whole explanation, flashback, scene, what have you?
So I always had the question of how Ellie is immune. I'm not gonna lie. It's been a
Yeah.
question that I've had. So cool that you answered it, but like Jason's point, it leaves more questions than answers. Like, why aren't we just like
replicating exactly what
right?
happened in that room. Yeah.
Yeah, to like create this cure. Like, why is it just Ellie then? If
Well,
How did the baby just pop out?
well,
Giving birth
okay.
kind of sucks.
To be fair, yeah, well, that's definitely a complaint that well, I mean, I guess like the idea was that she was under so much distress that like the fact that an infected was attacking her was somehow more stressful and important than a baby popping out. um I think when it comes to the thing of why aren't we doing this for all the kids, I mean, nobody knows, right? Like nobody they had no idea Ellie was immune in that moment.
oh
um
yeah, for sure. But I mean
and
this research that's happening. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I guess you could ask like why haven't the Fireflies tested this, and maybe the answer is they don't want to experiment on kids or something, unborn children,
It's also like
who knows.
Marlene was like there. You know, she saw like she was like there like immediately after. Like I feel like she could have used some of that information to knowing Ellie's immune and knowing
Well, she
how
didn't know
that.
Ellie was they had no idea Ellie was immune in that moment.
Well, no, not in that moment, but like
Yeah.
she could have used that experience as information for their goal. You know what I mean?
You're saying like 14 years later, remember that her mother was bit when she was
Yes.
born.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and that's a good point.
And considering that she's willing to kill Ellie for the cure, and I don't think she would have too much problem taking other pregnant women and trying to replicate it.
To be fair though, like it wasn't an easy decision for her. We get that impression from the show and from the game that that allowing the daughter of her best friend to be killed for the possibility of a cure, like it's not an easy decision for her.
Oh no,
That
I get that,
Yeah.
but I feel like one of the reasons, at least in the show, that they set it up is precisely because of the relationship she had with the mother. That
Mm.
it's so much harder. And like again, kudos to the actress who played Marlene. I think she's also one of the better actors in the show. Showing.
Meryl Dandridge, who also played Marlene in the game.
Oh
Oh, is
yeah.
it? I didn't even know that.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
she.
but she does. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
She did the motion capture, and the voice work for Marlene. So like she looks just like Marlene.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and she gives off the same vibe. She emotes the same way. Shows that ruthlessness
yeah.
behind, kind of the ideological precepts that the Fireflies have.
Mhm.
Although, and like I said earlier, the game kind of glosses over a lot of that. Although it does play a little bit with it. We already passed episode 7, but with the bombs that Riley's making and whatnot. So it does, to be fair, it does touch on it a little bit, but not as much as the game does. Anyway, she does a great job. It's just like, again, adding this. I just agree with what Delilah said. At least Ashley Johnson's performance, like as a mother, like I found it
Oh,
believable
yeah.
and great.
Oh yeah.
But like it's kind of just tattered by the fact, or ruined by the fact that like I'm kind of like left like what at the end of the scene.
Also, that scene of her like giving birth, like first of all, like it would be believable that Ellie's mom is this badass, but also like just like the way they were looking at each other, it didn't just feel like a moment of like mom daughter in apocalypse, two badasses. It felt like a transcendence of character, which I thought was like a really cool scene. I enjoyed it a lot, but I thought I wanted to know, and then now that I know, I'm like, I kind of wish I didn't know now, because now I'm like, but
yeah, and to be fair, like this is the explanation given in this show. That
Yeah.
not necessarily the explanation for why she's immune in the game. And hell, we might never get that explanation, and you could always just assume that this is why, but there's no necessary there's not necessarily a confirmation of it that this is a universal truth. It could just be existing in this show. And I think it's an interesting concept, but you're right, you guys are right, there are plot holes that could be poked with this idea as to why she's immune. That all aside, though, the rest of the episode, culminating in the ending of the story of The Last of Us. This is also if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is the shortest episode,
yeah.
which I felt this episode was a little bit rushed.
Yeah.
Not that I wanted there to be a lot of combat or conflict, but in particular, I wasn't really into the whole Joel very slowly walking through the halls of the hospital and just like one pop shot on people to down them and stuff. It just didn't really feel as desperate as it did in the game.
And so I actually, this would be my third favorite, simply because it's almost, with the exception of that, it's pretty much just the game.
Okay.
It's just a little less impactful because of the people playing it and their deliveries, but
yeah,
otherwise it's just the game. With Ellie, being vacant early on, obviously there's not the gameplay section where they actually get captured. They just get captured.
Yeah.
And that's why it feels kind of rushed, because the pacing is more in line with the game. So all of a sudden the show seems to speed up.
My biggest pacing issue is just that hospital, the whole hospital sequence, just because it just goes for this very pensive, slow-paced like waltz through the hospital, and this is the point where I feel Pedro Pascal's performance is at its most vacant.
Yes.
And I overall don't have an issue with his performance as Joel. I actually really like him as Joel, but this episode and this sequence in general is the one that gets me.
I do agree. Like, especially certain lines he delivers, like, I don't have time for this, or you'd only come after her. It's just kind of that vacant voice rather than the intonation that Troy Baker gave.
It just doesn't feel as matter of fact. It feels very like he knows, like he feels like he knows he's making a mistake, but he's got to do it anyway.
I also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just in the game, like it's very affirmative, like, what you're doing is wrong. I'm saving my surrogate daughter, and fuck you.
Yeah.
And this doesn't really have much of that.
Yeah, it's because they're clearly trying to, again, without going into part 2, they're clearly trying to frame it that way as opposed to how it was framed in the game, the original one. But I do agree with you that the slow-mo is kind of weird. Like, they play the weird music in the background.
Oh, but it's not even slow-mo. Like, he's just walking that slowly through the halls.
Yeah.
And because if you watch the other people in the hallways, like, they're all running at normal speed. He's just going very slowly.
Yeah, and they play weird music in the background as if something like tragic is happening. It's like I would have preferred there to be no music, and it's just the sounds of Joel's brutality wreaking hell. And then they
Mhm.
just kind of walk out. They in the game, Joel is carrying her out, and you can hear the guys chasing you from behind. Like you don't in the game, he didn't just kill everybody and then is just left with her and Marlene. Like the Fireflies are still very much there, still pursuing them down when they get in the
Yeah,
elevator.
it's just devoid of any sense of desperation, and that's ultimately why it doesn't work as well for me.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked it. I liked actually the music because I felt like that was their way of demonstrating the desperation in a way that couldn't be conveyed in the show as it was in the video game. Because in the video game you're playing, you're going through that hospital, you're fighting through these enemies that all of a sudden have assault rifles and shit like that, whereas here in the show, I don't direct movies, I don't play games, but I can't think of a way that they could have demonstrated that desperation as effectively. Maybe in Pedro Pascal's performance, sure, no doubt, but I'm
yeah.
trying to think like how else they would have conveyed that desperation in the way that it was conveyed through gameplay.
Yeah, to
um
be clear, I personally think the music was fitting and fine. It's just Pedro Pascal's performance just felt very slow and vacant and just did not feel like it was in the moment at all. And that's kind of my issue with it.
For sure.
So,
But I did like it. I actually think that this show did a good job in demonstrating gameplay at times. Like that laundromat bodega scene, whatever
yeah,
it
yeah.
was. The clicker part in episode 3 that we talked about, and I thought this as well. Like seeing Joel like pick up those stronger weapons and like fuck shit up. I thought that was like a little bit fan service for like gameplay. I liked it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I guess I could see the criticism with Joel's performance. Pedro Pascal's performance as
Yeah.
Joel.
Um, I think the giraffe scene was still just as good.
Oh yeah,
Again, line delivery notwithstanding, the giraffe sequence was still very well done.
yeah.
And yeah, I guess the ending, like the whole them going back to Jackson, swear to me. Uh, what did you guys did this ending as well done here as it was in the game? What are your guys' thoughts on the way that it ended? Oh man,
Sorry, Delilah. Do you want to go first?
uh, it's a stumper.
Yeah, so there was a part of it that I didn't like, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe it was this like long journey that they had walking through where they could have had all these conversations. Maybe I'm sorry, I'm not. I watched this when it released,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
for some
yeah.
reason this is vague in my head. But I felt like there was this long journey of them walking together in the show that wasn't in the game, where I felt like they could have had this conversation.
No, it was in the game
It was in the
too.
game too.
You walk you
Okay.
walk through like some woods a little bit and you climb up and then you see Jackson in the distance and then they have
Yeah, and
their
Ellie is
final.
very quiet still, just like she was on the bridge beforehand. Like
Yeah,
it's very clear she's being contemplative. I will say that
yeah.
in the game, the animation of the faces, the mocap, I felt a lot more emotion there because in the game, at least seemed very clear to me that Ellie was intended to know full well that she's being lied to, but accept it anyway because she cares so much about him now. Um,
Yeah.
and I got way more from the game, the CG. I don't even know whatever you want to call it. The graphics of the game and the emotions conveyed through the looks that Ellie gives versus what's her name?
Bella.
Bella. Yes, Bella Ramsey. Or yeah, I think that's her name.
Yeah, Bella Ramsey.
I feel like again she kind of just looked like she was looking vacant. And again, like this is animation versus like real people. So of course a real person isn't going to be as expressive. Um, but it still doesn't make it hit any less,
I
if
don't
that
know.
makes
I
sense.
I thought that their performances in that I think I still think Ashley Johnson's line delivery was better in the game than Bella Ramsey's line
Yes,
delivery
that
in this
too.
final
Yes.
moment. But I still think like her face I still think, you know, the lines they were still as poignant and powerful as they were in the game, and I'm glad that they didn't fuck with the idea of her saying okay and then cut the black. I'm glad that that was completely retained. Like, that's it, that's the end. And
Sure.
obviously we know it's not the end, but it's the end of this season, the end
It
of
is,
this game, you know.
it's the end for many of us.
Well, okay, maybe it's the end for Jason, except it's not, because I'm sure we'll do an episode on season
Yeah, I'm
2.
sure you guys will make me watch it. Yeah.
One thing I did neglect to bring up, even though I hinted at it earlier, is we find out the reason for Joel being deaf in the one ear is not just because
Oh
of
yes,
gunshot sounds, but because he attempted suicide
Oh
following
that's
yeah.
what I
Oh
was
Sarah's
my
referring
god.
to with
Sarah's
the
death.
Chekhov's gun thing.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm interested to hear what you mean, because I don't really think it fits with Chekhov's gun.
I shouldn't have used the term Chekhov's gun. It's
Okay,
more a
okay.
setup. The idea that he lost hearing in his right ear, but it's more because he was pointing an open barrel to his head and didn't properly. I don't even know how you explain away that he put a gun to his head, shot and missed. It's kind of weird, but that's not even the point. The important part, the part I didn't like, making this addition that Joel, and for all we know in the game, it's never. I think some people have tried to make the argument that it's implied Joel tried to kill himself at some point. I don't remember that at all,
Okay.
but um, I know that for the purposes of the show, and this is why I keep saying that this is just a different character for Joel. The Joel in the game would not have tried to kill himself. I don't buy that for a second.
Yeah,
And
but I
again, this
don't.
is why I said at the beginning, it seems like they're going for more of a PTSD, severe depression, almost not sociopathic, but uh, very both physically and emotionally detached.
I mean, I would say Joel in the game is much more of a sociopath than Joel in this series.
Well, that's why I said not sociopathic. Like,
Okay, okay.
well, the thing about both the games and what ostensibly should have been this world is that the characters behave so what we would perceive as sociopathic because the hierarchy of needs is thrown to chaos, and when the hierarchy of needs is thrown to chaos, introspection is put to the bottom, which allows you to do things you need to do to survive. That's
Hmm.
kind of the point, and the whole point was that Ellie would, like, at the end of the game. The question isn't, is it worth killing one girl to save the human race? It's, is it worth killing the only good character, the only innocent and pure character in the entire game? Does everybody else deserve that cure? And of course, the cure, the hypotheticals associated with that, that's a whole nother discussion that we've already covered in other podcasts. But
Yeah. Well,
What
that's
makes
an
this
interesting way
ending
to
so
look at it.
good?
Yeah, yeah. Um. Okay. Is there anything else you guys want to bring up about the last episode? Do we want to just talk verdicts and close this one up?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just happy to see people who wanted to experience such a really good story passively, generally, just like experience and debate this ending in the way that we did when the game first came out. And I feel like the ending of that game is one of the best endings and is still being discussed till this day. And so I'm glad that it's reaching a wider audience,
Yeah.
even if it's more effective or less effective in some ways as a story.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the people that are experiencing this for the first time, and you know, a lot of them are experiencing it for the first time because they don't play video games and they likely never will. So even though we said at the top of the episode, like, play the game, like, a lot of people that watch this will not play the game. This is their version of the story. And I think that's fine. Um, if you don't play games, you're likely never going to. The things that make this game, you know, the original version of this adaptation, like the video game The Last of Us, the thing that makes it so effective for me is, and for a lot of people, is the feeling um of distress, right? The whole survival aspect, actually putting yourself in the shoes of Joel and feeling the world around you come at you. And I think that's kind of what makes it really effective. That and the environmental storytelling, a lot of the things that just would not translate well over to a television adaptation. But I think for a television adaptation, this really worked in a lot of really good ways. There's things about it that worked better in the game for sure. We've outlined them all over the past 2 hours, but um, I do think overall this was a very, very good adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's not a high bar when it comes to video game
Well, yeah,
adaptations.
that's the other thing is like this is being lauded as like the best video game adaptation we've seen yet, and that's not saying a whole
No,
lot.
it's not. But this did set a higher bar than we've ever had,
Yeah.
and you know, I came into this thinking like this is redundant. The Last of Us is already a cinematic experience. Why are we doing it? I feel like I'm gonna watch the show and just not feel as impacted as I did in the game because I already experienced the story and there's no way. And the fact that they added so much is what made me, as someone who loves the game, be able to also enjoy the show because there was more to it than just like a copy and paste version of the story.
Yeah, because otherwise we'd be experiencing the same thing twice, and why would we want that? Like it is like I welcome the differences and the changes because it's something new, it's something fresh, and it's not it didn't feel like we were just hitting the same key story beats. It felt like we were hitting those story beats while also getting a lot of interesting supplemental stuff that, in my opinion, fit in really well.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I guess my overall take is I probably came off a lot harsher in the beginning than towards the end, mostly because, and this goes back to the pacing thing, where like
yeah,
the first half of the season, the episodes feel so long, and then towards the end, they feel so short,
yeah,
largely because they're, for the most part, following the game. You stop having a lot of these big additions or changes from the original game and all this extra stuff they padded in. And so going back to the pacing, it just feels like weird whiplash and in my opinion, the writing quality, like the first episode, I'm kind of like bored out of my mind until the final half hour. The second episode, I'm for the most part in it. As I said, that was my favorite episode,
yeah,
just the clicker hallway. And then episode three is just like, I don't know what I'm watching. Like, and then episode four and five, Delilah and I already talked. So it just felt like a series of really low lows and a few like, it's okay, not as good as the game, but and then back to a low for me. So it was just like tonal whiplash, pacing whiplash. I just couldn't jive with it.
yeah.
And I find it interesting that my favorite performances, I didn't even know the Marlene actress was the voice
Yeah.
actress from
I
the
thought
game.
you did. I thought
Like
that's why you were
all
saying
my
it.
favorite performances were from the people who played these characters in the game. Yeah,
Yeah, we also didn't mention Troy
and Troy
Baker
Baker. Yeah,
was David's right hand man, whatever his name was,
Yeah.
and
James. It was
he
James.
plays it off very subtle. Like he knows what's going on, but he also knows it's necessary.
Yeah,
Like he doesn't necessarily like David, but he knows that what needs to happens in terms of the cannibalism and whatnot. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's kind of our verdict. Is Delilah and I liked the show, and Jason did not like the show very much.
so don't listen to me. Just go watch the show and decide for yourself.
Well, yeah, that's fair. I mean, hopefully, if you're listening to this episode, you already have watched the show and you just want to hear
Yes.
three schmucks like us talk about it. So,
Three schmucks.
yeah.
Plus, like,
So,
just generally, like when we do these podcasts, I'll come into like our episodes of any game and now this
yeah.
show, like having my own perspective, and then I hear these perspectives and like my thoughts on it kind of shift, and I felt like that happened a little bit with Jason, which was kind of
Mm,
cool to see. Like, not
yeah.
that your perspective changed on it, but I felt like you were just like the fact that we all have different opinions, like episode by episode, just helps add like a different perspective and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like milds us a little bit to our own individual opinions.
I mean, I've had that before too, where like Jason will bring up some bullshit, but I'm kind of thinking there, like, huh, actually, that bullshit kind of makes some sense.
Yeah.
It's happened before.
Thanks. Glowing praise.
not,
No, I
not,
mean,
to,
I mean,
not actually devaluing Jason's opinions. I'm
at
just
the end of
kidding.
the day, I think what this is they added and changed so much that to me it feels very much like a different story. And I very much like The Last of Us' story, particularly because it's based on one of my favorite stories of all time. Well, two of them, but one is then in turn based on the other, True Grit and Children of Men. But they added so much, it just felt like a lot of the time the focus was not on that story, and it felt like they changed characters critically in certain ways. Not Ellie though, which I find interesting. Ellie, even though I didn't very much care for the actress that played her, the writing for her seemed consistent, which I found interesting. And I already said earlier they did a lot to further develop her character than you really see in the game. So to be fair,
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Jason, you want to give us a Kwasnicky rating on this? Is this or is that out of your
no,
depth? No, you want to
no,
skip the Kwasnicky rating?
that's out of my depth. I'll do it for games. The Kwasnicky rating is not for television shows.
Okay, all right.
Movies and games, not television shows. Because
Okay.
television shows, I feel like are a bit too complex to like rate an entire season. Because like I said, if it was just episode 2, I'd probably give it like a 7 or an 8, which would be really good.
Okay.
But if it's the, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
have
I
to go
gotcha,
episode by episode.
I gotcha. All right. Well, Delilah, you got anything to plug?
I actually am doing a full playthrough on YouTube of the next game that we're gonna talk about on this
Ooh,
podcast.
What's
Yeah,
that? What game is that?
Final Fantasy 16.
Oh shit! I've heard of that one.
A
That's what.
game that before this podcast we already started talking about by ourselves because we just can't wait to talk about it. So
Yeah, we've been talking. It's been popping off in the Slack. It was popping off just before I hit record on this episode. Lots of thoughts on that one. I'm very excited. I
I
have
promise
no
not
idea.
to be as much of an asshole for that episode.
No, because it's probably something you and I are gonna just like gush
Gush
about
about.
for the majority of it. You know, hopefully we will be. We have, and all of us have yet to finish it, but
Yes.
We're getting towards the well, at least I'm pretty sure I am.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm in the latter half, and I'm not that far behind you. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to a listener. His
Oh?
name's Alec. He's made some comments about our podcast personally to me, as well as I think in comments. And he's joined my stream. The one time I streamed in a long time, and he is just saying a lot of positive things about the podcast. So I just want to give him a shout out. Thank you for
Nice.
being a
Thank
part
you,
of
Alec. I hope
Thank
you.
you, Alec.
Don't think any less of them because of me.
it.
Yes, if you want to be a supreme supporter of Reap the Spoils, if you're listening on YouTube, thank you so much. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Like this episode, give it a thumbs up. In the comments, tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, tell us what your favorite episode of the show was. If you agreed with any of Jason's madman ramblings, or if you liked the show much more like Delilah and I did. Yeah, just let us know. And be sure to share the show with your friends, your family, your pets, your kids. Maybe not your kids.
Oh.
I do this whole thing every single episode. It never gets old for me. If you listen on Apple Podcast, again, thank you. Please be sure to rate and review the show, 5 stars preferred. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. And if you listen on Spotify, I think they have a rating system. Give us 5 stars there, or the top marks for Reap the Spoils. Please, it helps us grow so much if you guys rate and review the show, give us likes, give us comments. It really, really helps. So please, I'm begging you, please. Anyway, you can follow me on Twitter at Nimbleheimian, although I'm really not on there much anymore. I check Wario64 tweets every day, and that's about it. You can follow Delilah on Twitter at Assassina_San. You can follow Jason on Twitter at SolidQuaz, but don't follow him.
I said I'm not on Twitter, and then like at some point,
he's like, his Twitter's dead. It's just.
I made an account when like Twitter first came out.
Yeah, it's non-existent anymore. Including the Twitter when Twitter first came out. It's just gone. It's dead to us.
You can have all these people adding you, and we'll never know.
Yeah, watch. I have like 10,000 followers on Twitter. I just don't know it.
Yeah, you have 10,000 when I have like 160.
Yeah, I have a religious cult just waiting for the day when I actually use it. That's all they do with their lives.
Yeah. Well, more importantly, yeah, just make sure to share the show. It really helps us grow. And yeah, that's it. I hope this experiment worked well for the people that wanted it. Maybe we'll do more of these in the future. More video game movies are coming out. We got that Gran Turismo movie.
Oh god.
We got that Twisted Metal TV show coming to Peacock.
Oh god.
Guys, Let me hear it. Do we want to do Twisted Metal? Let us know in the
Oh, I
comments.
still got to see Mario.
Oh yeah. Oh, Mario could be a fun one too. Yeah, let us know in the comments what you want to hear from us. If you want to hear more television and movie speak. And otherwise, join us next episode for Final Fantasy 16. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Hey, everybody.